A man sits in a mine. He has been sitting there for 30 years. The Empire put him there. The Nords put him there. Everyone agreed he was too dangerous to kill, too useful to free. So they left him underground in chains and hoped the dark would do the work for them. It did not. Lie back. Let the fire go low. Tonight we are going deep into one of the most overlooked questlines in all of Skyrim. A story about land, memory, and a people that most of the world decided to forget. This is the story of Madanak, the king in rags, and the war that never truly ended. Markarth is one of the oldest cities in Skyrim. That fact alone should stop you for a moment. The city was not built by Nords. The stone walls, the carved arches, the deep corridors cut into the mountain. None of that came from Nordic hands. The Reach folk built it. Long before any Nords set foot in the region, a people called the Reach folk lived across the land, known as the Reach. They were not simple raiders. They had their own culture, their own faith, and their own way of reading the world. They watched the seasons through the eyes of the land itself. They buried their dead in a way that kept them close to the living. They knew every stone of that mountain city because they were the ones who first gave each stone a name. The Nords arrived later. They claimed the city. They called the old builders primitive. That word, primitive, is doing a lot of heavy work in Markarth's history, and the questline eventually asks you to look at what it is actually covering up. The Forsworn conspiracy begins with a murder in the marketplace. A woman dies in front of you. A man runs. The guards arrest you instead. That moment, that quick, strange injustice, is the questline's first quiet statement. In Markarth, guilt and innocence are not decided by what you did. They are decided by who benefits from your guilt. The Silverblood family controls most of Markarth's economy. They own the mine. They fund the guards. They decide who gets punished and who walks free. The murder in the marketplace is connected to them. The conspiracy the questline names in its title is not about the Forsworn at all. It is about the people running the city from behind closed doors. The Forsworn are just the part that is easy to blame. There is a figure behind everything in this questline. His name is Eltries. He is a young Reachman who grew up inside the city. Not in a camp, not with the Forsworn, but as a citizen of Markarth. His father was killed years ago under suspicious circumstances. He has been quietly collecting information ever since. He passes you notes. He meets you in a temple. He asks for help exposing the truth. Eltries never picks up a weapon. He never threatens anyone. He just wants to know what happened to his father and why no one was ever held responsible. The questline kills him for it. The guards find him before you can act. He dies in the place he thought was safe, a temple, surrounded by the stone faces of the divines. His death happens off-screen. You arrive and he is already gone. The questline does not give you a moment to grieve. It immediately arrests you instead. Sithana Mine sits beneath Markarth. Most players know it as the prison where the questline sends you. What is easy to miss is what the mine actually is. It is a silver mine. It generates real wealth, specifically for the Silverblood family. The prisoners inside are not simply being punished. They are working. Every swing of a pickaxe fills someone else's purse. The Reachmen who end up there are treated as labor, not people. The guards do not enter the mine because they do not need to. The prisoners are starved and kept in competition with each other. Violence keeps them divided. Division keeps them manageable. The whole system runs without anyone ever needing to admit what it actually is. When the questline sends you down into that dark, the first thing it does is take everything from your inventory. No weapons, no armor, no potions. You have only yourself. That feeling was deliberate. It is the same feeling the Reachmen have had for a long time. Madanak has been in the mine for 30 years. He was the leader of the Forsworn before his capture. He led the Reachmen in a brief, violent uprising during the Fourth Era. a period when the Reach was temporarily free of Nordic control. That period lasted less than 2 years. The Empire reclaimed the land. Madanak was caught. His followers were killed or scattered. He should have been executed. Instead, he was placed in the mine. Some believe the Silverbloods wanted him alive as a symbol, proof that the old Reachfolk king had been broken. That plan did not work the way they hoped. Inside the mine, Madanak became something harder to break. He organized the remaining Reachman prisoners quietly. He built loyalty through patience. He waited. The man who went into the mine in chains became something the walls could not contain. He simply did not show it yet. Inside the mine, there is a shrine. It is hidden, carved into a back wall, and easy to walk past without noticing. It is a shrine to Talos. This detail matters for a reason that goes beyond the obvious. Talos worship was banned by the White Gold Concordat, the treaty between the Empire and the Thalmor. In Markarth, the guards enforced that ban. Outside the mine, shrines to Talos are removed. Worshippers are arrested. But inside the mine, in the one place where the guards do not go, a Talos shrine survives. The Reachmen built it, not because they are devoted followers of Nordic religion. The Reach folk have their own gods, their own powers. They built it because the mine is the one space in Markarth where the Silverbloods and the Empire have no reach. The shrine is not a statement of faith. It is a statement of territory. This corner is ours. You do not come here. The forbidden god lives where the powerful fear to look. The Reach folk belief system is called the Old Ways. It does not match anything in the standard Tamrielic religious framework. They do not worship the divines. They do not follow Daedric princes in the way most people understand that relationship. They believe the land itself is alive. Mountains, rivers, stones. These things have presence and memory. The Hagravens that accompany Forsworn camps are not monsters in the eyes of the Reach folk. They are holy figures, women who gave up their human form to become something closer to the land's own nature. The questline does not explain all of this directly. It shows it instead. The camps you walk through, the rituals you observe, the way the Reachmen speak about the earth beneath their feet. All of it points toward a faith that is older than anything on Skyrim's surface. The ending of the Forsworn conspiracy questline splits in 2 directions. You can side with Madanak and help him escape, or you can work with the Silverbloods and put him back in chains. What the questline does quietly, and what makes it worth thinking about, is that neither ending feels fully clean. If you side with Madanak, he walks free, and the Forsworn resume their violence. People die. Villages burn. The land they want back does not come back peacefully. If you side against him, a man who fought for his people's homeland goes back underground, and the Silverbloods keep everything they took. The questline does not tell you which choice is right. It shows you 2 kinds of injustice and asks you to pick the one you can live with. Not many questlines in Skyrim do that. The Reach itself is worth one more quiet thought before this chapter closes. Most players move through it quickly. They follow roads. They avoid the camps. They see the Forsworn as enemies and move on. But the landscape holds something old if you slow down. The standing stones that predate every empire. The carved faces in rock formations that no scholar has fully explained. The way the rivers run through the valleys in patterns that suggest someone long ago planned it that way. The Reach folk did not just live in this land. They read it. They understood it in a way that required generations of attention. That knowledge did not survive the occupation intact. Most of it is gone now. What remains lives in the camps, in the rituals, in the old women who still speak to stones. The city of Markarth stands above all of it, carved by Reach folk hands, claimed by someone else, and still humming with a history that its current owners would rather not discuss. The mine is quiet now. The king has either walked out or gone back to waiting. Either way, the land outside is still the same land, still old, still holding everything that happened on it. Stone does not forget. It just takes a long time to say anything. The first people who came to Skyrim did not fear death. They prepared for it. They planned around it. They built their entire relationship with the land on the assumption that dying was not the end of anything. It was simply a change of location. And the stone mounds they left behind are still here, still sealed, still holding whatever they put inside them. The Atmorans crossed from a frozen continent far to the north. They arrived with almost nothing written down. No maps, no records, no temples. What they carried instead was a set of deep beliefs about the dead. And those beliefs were more organized than most people realize. When someone died, the body was not left behind. It was prepared over several days. It was given weapons, tools, and sometimes food. Not as symbols, as actual provisions. Because the person was going somewhere, not disappearing. The burial mound was not a grave in the way most cultures use that word. It was a home. The dead moved in and were expected to stay. The shaman managed everything between the living and the dead. Every Atmoran settlement had one. Their role covered two directions at once. Speaking to the living on behalf of those who had passed, and speaking to the past on behalf of those still breathing. When a chieftain died, the shaman conducted a sealing ceremony that took days to complete. Symbols were carved into the entrance stone. Each symbol was a boundary instruction, telling the spirit where it could go and where it could not. A ward was placed on the inner chamber. That ward kept the body preserved and kept the spirit tied to its resting place. The shamans understood something important. A dead person without proper sealing would wander, and a wandering dead person was not at peace. It was lost. Lost things, in their belief system, caused harm to the living without meaning to. Shroud Hearthbarrow sits just outside the village of Ivarstead. Most players find it early in the game. A ghost named Windhelm haunts the entrance and drives away anyone who tries to go inside. The questline around this barrow is small. Recover a journal, solve a puzzle, retrieve a sapphire claw. But what the barrow itself contains is worth slowing down for. The inner chambers are old, much older than the Draga inside them suggest. The layout follows the early Atmoran pattern, a central resting hall, side chambers for lesser warriors, and a main tomb at the deepest point for whoever this place was built to honor. The symbols carved into the walls near the entrance are not decorative. They are the remains of the shaman's sealing work. Faded now, incomplete in places, which may explain why the place never felt entirely quiet to the villagers of Ivarstead. A seal that has worn thin does not hold the same way it once did. Hilgrun's tomb tells a different kind of story. The questline there involves a man named Goldir, whose family tomb has been taken over by a necromancer called Valsveran. Valsveran is a Dunmer, a dark elf, who has entered a Nordic burial site and is raising the dead inside it for his own purposes. That detail matters more than it seems. The Nordic tradition of burial was built around the idea that the dead stayed where they were placed. The shaman's sealing was a contract. The dead person agreed, in a sense, to remain. They were honored. They were tended to. In return, they stayed put. Valsveran broke that contract by entering the tomb and commanding the dead to move against their will. From the perspective of old Nordic belief, what he did was not simply grave robbery. It was a specific kind of violation, forcing the honored dead to serve someone they owed nothing to. Goldir's anger when he asks for help is not just grief. It is the anger of someone watching a sacred agreement be torn apart by a stranger who did not understand what he was touching. Vollenrud is quieter than either of those places. It sits in the tundra northeast of Whiterun, and it connects to a small questline involving a companion's contract. The barrow was built for an ancient Nordic warrior king. The chambers inside are deep and well preserved. What makes Vollenrud worth paying attention to is its structure. The place was designed with two separate paths, one for those who remembered the warrior king in life, and one for those who came after and only knew his legend. The shamans who built it understood that memory changes over time. The people who knew someone personally grieved differently than the people who only inherit the story. So they built two doors, two approaches, the same tomb, reached by two different kinds of loss. That level of care inside a burial structure says something about how seriously the early Nords took the work of honoring their dead. The Draugr problem in Skyrim's present day connects directly to all of this. Draugr are not simply animated corpses. They are the result of a specific failure in the old burial system. When a warrior was interred in a Nordic tomb, the expectation was that the shaman ceiling would hold. The spirit would rest. The body would stay still. But shamans are gone now. The old knowledge that maintained those seals died with the people who carried it. Centuries passed. The seals weakened. And the dead, who had been waiting in their stone chambers with their weapons still in hand, began to stir. They are not evil in the way most enemies in Skyrim are evil. They are disoriented. They are old. They remember a duty. Protect the tomb, guard the resting place, and they are still performing it long after anyone asked them to. The Draugr do not know the world has moved on. They only know the instructions they were given before everything went quiet. Windhelm's Hall of the Dead holds one more thread worth following. Calixto Corium, the same figure connected to the murders in Windhelm's market district, also had a history of disturbing burial sites. But the Hall of the Dead questline sits separately from that. The hall is tended by a priest of Arkay named Helgerd. Arkay is the divine associated with death and burial rites. His priests manage the transition between the living world and whatever comes after. In Windhelm, Helgerd is responsible for ensuring that the dead in the city are properly tended, that the old burial customs, even in a changed form, are still respected. The questline involving her is small. A body has been disturbed. Someone entered the hall without permission. What the questline quietly points toward is the gap between the old Atmoran burial traditions and the newer religious framework the divines provide. Helgerd follows Arkay's rules, but the people buried in Windhelm's oldest sections were placed there long before Arkay had worshippers in Skyrim. Their burial customs and her burial customs do not fully match. She tends the new graves properly. The old ones, in the deepest part of the hall, she tends as best she can. But the sealing knowledge required to do it right no longer exists. The mounds are still out there, hundreds of them, spread across the hills and valleys of Skyrim. Most have never been opened. Most still hold whatever was placed inside them long ago. The seals are old now. Some have held, some have not. The dead inside range from perfectly still to quietly restless, depending on how well the original work was done and how much time has worn it down. Walking past one of those mounds on a road at dusk, you might not think much of it. Just a hill, just a stone, but somewhere underneath, a warrior is still waiting for someone to come back and tell them the watch is over. No one has come back yet. No one knows the right words anymore. The ground in Skyrim remembers longer than the people walking on top of it. There is a man living alone on a block of ice far north of Skyrim. No town nearby, no road leading to him, just frozen water, grey sky, and a small outpost he built himself out of whatever washed ashore. He has been there for years. He chose to be there. And if you ask him why, he will tell you something that sounds like madness, but lands with the quiet weight of someone who genuinely believes every word. His name is Septimus Signis. He was once one of the most respected scholars in Tamriel. He studied at the College of Winterhold. He read things most people never get access to. He was brilliant in the specific way that makes other brilliant people uncomfortable. Always one step ahead, always seeing connections that no one else had noticed yet. Then he read an Elder Scroll, and something in him shifted in a direction it never came back from. The Elder Scrolls are not books. That distinction matters. A book holds information. You read it, you absorb it, you put it down. An Elder Scroll does something different. It shows the reader moments outside of time, past events, future possibilities, things that have not happened yet and may never happen depending on choices not yet made. The scrolls do not belong to any era. They exist alongside time rather than inside it. Reading one without proper training does not simply give you knowledge. It takes something in return. For most people, that cost is their eyesight. The monks who dedicate their lives to studying the scrolls go blind gradually. Their eyes trade vision for something deeper. Septimus Signis did not go blind. What he lost instead was harder to name. He came away from his Elder Scroll convinced he had understood something fundamental about the structure of everything, not just Tamriel, not just the universe as mortals understand it. Everything, the full pattern. He described it in fragments. A tower that was also a lock, a heart that was also a key, a god that folded itself into a box to think more clearly. Most people who heard him speak after that moment assumed he had simply broken. His language stopped making sense in ordinary terms. His references became circular. He pointed at things that were not there. The college eventually stopped inviting him to lectures. He left on his own terms, walked north, and built his outpost on the ice. He was not running from anything. He was getting closer to something. The Dwemer lockbox is what brought the questline to him. Deep in his outpost, on a table covered with notes written in a script that curves back on itself, sits a box made of Dwemer metal. It is large. It is sealed. Septimus cannot open it. He has spent years trying. The box hums faintly. It has no visible lock. The mechanisms that hold it closed are inside the metal itself. A Dwemer design so precise that conventional tools cannot find a way in. Septimus believes the box contains a Dwemer heart, a condensed piece of whatever the Dwemer understood about the nature of gods and souls. He does not want the heart for power. He wants it because he believes opening the box will confirm what he saw in the Elder Scroll. He wants to be right. That is the whole of his motivation. After years of being dismissed and doubted, he wants one moment of proof that the pattern he saw was real. The questline asks you to travel across Skyrim, collecting blood samples from various elven races: Altmer, Bosmer, Dunmer, Falmer, Orsimer. Septimus needs these to construct a device that can mimic the Dwemer genetic signature and trick the box into opening. The task sounds clinical when described plainly. Walking through it feels different. Each blood sample requires entering a dangerous location, finding the right source, and returning across long distances to a man who is gradually becoming less coherent with each visit. His notes get stranger. His sentences get shorter. He starts referring to Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, as a collaborator rather than an observer. That shift is easy to miss on a first playthrough. It becomes very clear on a second one. Hermaeus Mora sits behind this entire questline without ever announcing himself. He is the Prince of Forbidden Knowledge, the collector of secrets, the keeper of information that was never meant to be shared. His realm is called Apocrypha. It looks like an infinite library, dark and wet, filled with books that writhe when you touch them. Mora does not intervene in mortal affairs the way other Daedric princes do. He does not demand worship. He does not send cultists. He simply positions himself near people who are already moving toward him on their own. Septimus did not seek Mora out. Mora arranged things so that Septimus would arrive at the ice outpost, find the lockbox, and begin pulling others into the search. Every person who helped Septimus was unknowingly doing something for Mora. The prince never lied to anyone in this questline. He also never warned anyone. He watched. He waited. He collected what came to him. The Ogma Infinium is the artifact at the end of the questline. It is a book. though calling it a book undersells what it is. The Ogma Infinium was written by Xerxes, a divine scribe, and later claimed by Hermaeus Mora. Reading it grants the reader a burst of profound knowledge. Skills sharpen, abilities accelerate, understanding deepens in ways that would normally take years to develop. It sounds like a gift. The questline frames it as a reward. What happens to Septimus when he finally opens the lockbox suggests the reality is more complicated. He touches the collected blood. The box opens. He reaches inside, and then he simply dissolves. Not violently, not dramatically. He turns to ash and drifts apart in the cold air of his outpost. Mora's voice arrives a moment later to collect the Ogma Infinium and hand it over. The prince sounds neither pleased nor disappointed. He sounds the way someone sounds when they finish a task they started a long time ago. Septimus got what he wanted. That is the quiet center of his tragedy. The box opened. The pattern he saw in the Elder Scroll was confirmed, at least in his own mind, in that last moment before he dissolved. He was right. He had decoded something real, and the universe rewarded him for it by removing him from the equation. He was not punished for curiosity. He was simply used up. Knowledge of that depth, in Mora's framework, does not belong to the person who finds it. It belongs to the collection. Septimus was always going to end at that outpost. The Elder Scroll showed him the destination. What it did not show him was that arriving there was the last thing he would ever do. The ice outpost itself deserves a moment of attention. It is a small space, a few tables, some shelves, notes pinned to every surface, a fire that barely holds back the cold outside. There is something in that image. A man who once lectured at a prestigious college, now crouched over a table on a block of ice, writing sentences that spiral inward and never quite close. He gave up every comfort the academic world offered. He gave up colleagues, recognition, warmth, and safety. He sat alone for years with a box he could not open, in weather that most people would not survive, because he needed to finish one thought. That kind of focus is not madness. It is something more specific than madness. It is a person who found one thing more important than everything else, and arranged their entire life around it. Whether that is admirable or heartbreaking depends on what you think knowledge is worth. The broader lesson the questline carries is easy to walk past. Hermaeus Mora is often treated as a secondary villain, a creepy voice in the dark, a prince associated with tentacles and ink. But his method in this questline is worth sitting with. He never forced anyone to do anything. He never corrupted Septimus the way Daedric influence usually works. He simply let Septimus be exactly who he already was. He let curiosity run to its natural conclusion. The Prince of Forbidden Knowledge does not need to tempt people. He just needs to wait for someone curious enough to walk the whole road without stopping. Septimus walked it. The road ended at ice. The box opened, and Mora filed the whole thing away somewhere in Apocrypha, in a section labelled with a name no mortal has ever been able to read. The outpost is empty now. The fire has long gone out. The notes are still on the tables, circles within circles, words that reference each other across dozens of pages. No one has come to read them. They are not the kind of notes that make sense to anyone who was not already standing where Septimus stood. But somewhere in those pages, in the handwriting of a man who gave everything to one question, the answer is probably there. Waiting. Cold. Perfectly preserved by the ice around it. Mora would appreciate that, most likely. He has always had patience for things that take a long time to be found. Every morning in Dawnstar, the people wake up exhausted. The guards look hollow. The innkeeper moves slowly, like someone carrying weight that has no name. The miners who descend into the iron shafts each day do it with the faces of people who spent the night somewhere they did not choose to go. Nobody in Dawnstar is sleeping well. Nobody has slept well in a long time. They all share the same dream. They cannot describe it clearly. They only know it leaves them with the feeling that something is watching them from inside their own heads, patient, quiet, and completely unbothered by the fact that they want it gone. This is not a traditional curse. No spell targeted the town. No enemy chose Dawnstar deliberately. What happened is older and quieter than that. Something woke up nearby, and when it woke, the dreams of every person within reach became part of its collection. The Daedric princes do not live in time. They exist beside it, always present, never aging, never shifting the way mortals shift. Viamina is one of them. Her domain covers dreams, memory, and the soft border between sleep and waking, where the mind opens without meaning to. She does not force her way into a dreaming mind. She moves through softness the way cold air moves under a door. By the time anyone senses her presence, the visit is already finished, and whatever she came for has already been taken. Her realm is called Quagmire. It behaves unlike any other place in Oblivion. Most Daedric realms follow internal rules. Strange landscapes, yes, but consistent ones. Quagmire has no consistency at all. Reality inside it shifts every few seconds without warning and without pattern. A field becomes a burning ruin. A burning ruin becomes a flooded corridor. A flooded corridor becomes a familiar room in a house that no longer stands anywhere in the world. There is no rhythm to follow, no sequence to predict. People caught inside cannot orient themselves, because orientation requires something to remain fixed. Nothing in Quagmire ever stays fixed long enough to lean against. Viamina designed it that way. Disorientation is not a side effect. It is the entire purpose. A mind that cannot find its footing cannot protect what it holds. What she collects is memories specifically, not experiences, but memories. The difference matters more than it seems. An experience happens once and ends. A memory is what the mind builds afterward, filtered through emotion, shaped by time, colored by the specific interior world of one particular person. Two people can stand in the same burning building and carry completely different memories of it. One remembers the heat. One remembers a face. One remembers a sound so small and specific that no one else in the room would have caught it. Viamina wants all of those versions. She pulls them from sleeping minds and deposits them in Quagmire, where they join everything else she has gathered from everyone else who ever dreamed within her range. What she leaves behind is the nightmare, not as punishment, as residue. When something is drawn out of a sleeping mind, the gap it leaves does not stay empty. It fills with something darker and less organized than what was removed. The person wakes disturbed without knowing why. They feel the absence of something they cannot name. Over repeated visits, the pattern wears the mind thin. Sleep stops feeling like rest. It starts feeling like a place to approach carefully, if at all. Above Dawnstar, cut into the cliff face, sits Nightcaller Temple. From the road below, it looks abandoned. The stones are old. No torches burn at the entrance. No signs mark what the place once was. Inside, past the first few dark corridors, the temple opens into chambers that reveal their purpose gradually. Altars, offerings, the specific geometry of a space built to honor something that does not require light to see by. The shrine of Viamina sits at the center. It has been active for a long time, long enough that its influence reached down the cliff and into the town below, and settled into the sleep of every person living there like sediment settling into still water. A priest named Orandur is trying to stop it. He is a Dunmer, a dark elf, and he carries a specific weight that the questline reveals slowly. He was not always a priest of Mora. He belonged to Viamina once. He served in that temple. He was part of the group that activated the device inside it. A vessel called the Skull of Corruption, which amplifies Viamina's reach and pushes nightmares outward into the surrounding area. Something changed for him. He left. He spent years in service to Mora, the divine associated with compassion and healing, trying to counterbalance what he had helped build. When the nightmares in Dawnstar reached a level he could no longer ignore, he came back to finish what he should have stopped the first time. Erandor's plan is to destroy the Skull of Corruption. The quest line walks alongside him as he works through the temple, past the preserved bodies of his former brothers and sisters who took a sleeping draught to survive a siege and never woke up. He speaks to them as he passes, short sentences, apologies without much elaboration. The questline does not give him a breakdown or a dramatic confession. He simply acknowledges the people he left behind and keeps walking. That restraint makes the whole sequence land more quietly than a louder version of the same scene would have. Hermaeus Mora appears partway through the questline and offers an alternative. The Skull of Corruption is a powerful artifact. Mora would prefer it be kept rather than destroyed. He suggests that Erandor himself cannot be trusted, that his past loyalty to Vaermina means the priest will turn at the last moment and claim the skull for himself. Mora frames this as useful information. He presents it calmly, without urgency, as though he's simply offering a fact for consideration. The questline forces a choice. Trust Erandor and let him destroy the artifact, or kill Erandor before he reaches it and take the skull for Mora's collection. The Prince of Forbidden Knowledge does not need to lie. He just needs to introduce doubt at the right moment and let the listener decide what to do with it. If you let Erandor finish, he destroys the skull. The nightmares in Dawnstar stop. The people sleep without disturbance for the first time in what has been, for some of them, years. The questline ends quietly. No celebration, no reward ceremony. Erandor stands in the ruined temple and looks at where the skull used to be. He does not seem relieved exactly. He seems like someone who has put something down that they carried too long, and is now just standing in the sudden lightness of not carrying it anymore. What the questline does with Dawnstar's ordinary residents is worth pausing on. The guards, the innkeeper, the miners, none of them are main characters. None of them drive the story. They are simply people who live in a town that sits near something they had no part in creating and no ability to fight. The nightmares reached them because they were close. That is the only reason. Vaermina did not choose them. She did not target Dawnstar for any specific purpose. She simply extended her reach, and these people happened to be within it. Their suffering is incidental to her. They are not victims of malice. They are victims of proximity, and that specific kind of helplessness, being harmed by something that does not even know your name, sits differently than being targeted. It is quieter. It has no villain to confront, just a presence, enormous and indifferent, casting a shadow too wide to step out of on your own. The priest of Mara facing a Daedric prince with prayer and determination, and a complicated personal history, is not a story about winning. It is a story about the kind of person who shows up anyway. Erandor had every reason to stay away from that temple. He knew what was inside. He knew what the skull was capable of. He knew his own history with the place made him the last person who should be trusted to walk back in. He went anyway. Not because he was certain it would work, because the people in the town below were not sleeping, and he was the only one who understood why. Vaermina is still there. Destroying the skull reduced her influence in Dawnstar specifically. It did not remove her from the world. Her realm still shifts in its endless, patternless cycle. She is still collecting from the minds that sleep within her reach, in every corner of Tamriel, where her influence runs quietly beneath the surface. The dreams she has taken from Dawnstar's residents are stored in Quagmire now. Fragments of ordinary lives, small fears, half-formed memories of things that mattered to specific people on specific nights. She keeps all of it. She does not discard anything. In Quagmire, nothing is ever thrown away. It simply becomes part of the landscape that shifts and shifts and shifts, with no one left inside it to remember what any of it originally was. Sleep comes slower in Dawnstar than it used to. The people there are healing, but healing takes time. The nights are long on that northern coast. The wind comes off the sea and moves through the town without stopping. And somewhere above it all, the empty temple sits on its cliff with its door still open, its altar cold, its shrine dark for the first time in longer than anyone in the town can remember. The women who became Hagravens did not fall into it. They walked toward it deliberately, with full knowledge of what waited on the other side. They chose the feathers over the skin. They chose the claws over the hands. They chose something ancient and rooted and permanent over the ordinary shape of a human life. The questlines that brush against this choice, Hag's End, Darklight Tower, do not spend much time explaining it. They show the result and leave the reasoning to anyone willing to look closely enough. A Hagraven looks wrong to most people who encounter one. The bent posture, the feathered arms, the face that sits between human and bird without fully committing to either. Most players treat them as enemies, dangerous, aggressive, worth avoiding or killing quickly. What the questlines around them suggest is that this reaction, understandable as it is, misses the context almost entirely. A Hagraven is not a monster that used to be a person. A Hagraven is a person who used to be something less powerful than they are now. The Reach folk have practiced their old ways for longer than most Tamrielic cultures have existed. Their faith does not center on gods in the conventional sense. No temples, no divine hierarchy, no prayers addressed to named figures sitting in distant realms. The Reach folk read the land. They understood the hills and rivers of the Reach as living things with their own presence and memory. Power, in their framework, was not granted from above. It rose from below, from soil, stone, root, and bone. The witches of the Reach were the people who spent their lives learning to access that rising power directly. They studied plants, blood, weather patterns, and the behavior of animals in specific seasons. They accumulated knowledge slowly over decades, and at a certain point, for the ones who wanted to go further than knowledge could take them, there was one more step available. The transformation into a Hagraven is not a spell cast on someone against their will. It is a ritual the candidate enters knowingly. The specific details are not fully documented in any source accessible to outsiders. The Reach folk kept their sacred knowledge internal, passed through direct teaching rather than written records. What is known is the shape of the exchange. The woman gives up her human form. In return, she receives a depth of magical ability that no amount of study alone could provide. The feathers, the claws, the altered face. These are not punishments or side effects. They are the physical marks of a transaction completed. The body changes because the interior of the person has changed first. The outside simply catches up. Hag's End sits at the top of a waterfall in the Reach. The approach is long and the interior is dense with traps. At the highest point of the structure, a Hagraven waits. The questline that brings you there, a companion's contract or a thieves' guild's side job depending on the playthrough, frames the Hagraven as a target, an enemy to remove, a problem to solve. The layout of Hag's End, though, tells a different story about what the place actually is. The lower levels hold younger witches still in training. The middle levels hold more advanced practitioners. The Hagraven at the top is not a boss in the dungeon design sense. She is the senior figure of a functioning institution. Hag's End is a school. The questline sends you through it like a disruption, not like an explorer. The witches defending the place are not protecting a lair. They are protecting their teacher. Darklight Tower stands in the rift, surrounded by autumnal forest, and the kind of quiet that suggests the place has been undisturbed for a long time. The questline there begins with a woman named Ilya, standing outside the tower, needing help. Her mother is inside. Her mother is about to complete the Hagraven transformation ritual. Ilya wants to stop it. She leads you through the tower, past the witches her mother commands, to reach the ritual chamber before it concludes. The quest line sits on a specific tension. A daughter who loves her mother and cannot accept what her mother is choosing to become. That tension does not resolve cleanly. If you reach the chamber in time, the ritual is interrupted. The mother does not thank you. She fights. From her perspective, she was moments away from the thing she had worked toward for years. And two people she trusted walked in and took it from her. Ilya's position in that quest line is understandable. She is watching someone she loves choose a form of transformation that will make them, in practical terms, a different kind of being. The relationship they had, the conversations they shared, the specific texture of knowing each other as mother and daughter. All of that changes when the transformation completes. Ilya is not wrong to grieve that, but the questline does not fully validate her position either. It shows both sides without editorial comment. The mother is not presented as corrupted or deceived. She is presented as someone who made a choice that her daughter cannot follow her into. That is a different kind of story than the standard dungeon narrative, and it lands differently because of it. Within Forsworn camps, Hagravens occupy the highest position. They are not kept at a distance or treated with fear by the reach folk around them. They are consulted. They are given the best location in the camp, usually elevated near the fire with clear sight lines in multiple directions. The Briarheart warriors are bound them through a specific ritual that involves replacing a human heart with a Briarheart plant, a process only a Hagraven can perform. This connection between the Hagraven and the Briarheart is not just functional, it is sacred. The Hagraven is not serving the Forsworn camp. The camp is organized around her. She is the spiritual and magical center of the entire group. Every decision of consequence runs through her. Every significant ritual is hers to conduct. The warriors who fight and die for the camp do so partly in service to the old ways she embodies. The roots of this tradition go back further than the Forsworn themselves. Long before the Nords arrived in the Reach, the ancestors of the Reach folk held the same practices. The women who trained in the old knowledge and chose transformation were revered then as they are revered now. The specific political circumstances changed dramatically over the centuries. Conquest, displacement, resistance, and the slow pressure of outside cultures trying to overwrite local ones. But the Hagraven tradition survived all of it. It survived because it was not dependent on political stability, land ownership, or institutional support. It required only two things: a woman willing to learn, and a woman already transformed who was willing to teach. That simplicity made it nearly impossible to fully eliminate. You cannot burn down a tradition that carries itself in people rather than in buildings. The magic that Hagravens use draws on something different from the schools of magicka most practitioners study. It is not destruction, restoration, or conjuration in the academic sense. It is older and less classified. It uses blood, feathers, specific plants gathered at specific times, and the inherent power of the Reach's landscape as raw material. A Hagraven conducting a ritual is not casting spells in the way a college-trained mage would recognize. She is completing a process, one that began with the land, moved through her transformed body, and emerges as an effect in the world. The body itself is the instrument. That is why the transformation is necessary. You cannot play that kind of music on an ordinary body. The instrument has to be rebuilt first. The questlines around Hagravens consistently underestimate what they are looking at. The contracts treat them as targets. The dungeon layouts treat their sanctuaries as obstacles. Even the NPCs who give you these assignments rarely demonstrate any curiosity about who or what they are sending you to remove. The Reach folk understand. They have always understood. The rest of Skyrim looks at the feathers and the claws and the wrong-shaped face, and reaches a conclusion without asking any questions. That conclusion is convenient. It makes the Hagraven easy to categorize, easy to dismiss, easy to kill on a contract without thinking about what was chosen and how long it took to choose it and what it cost the woman who stood at the entrance of that ritual and walked through it anyway. The Reach is full of things that look like one thing and are actually another. The Hagravens are the clearest example. They look like the end of something. They are actually the middle of a tradition that started long before Skyrim had roads, and continues in the camps and towers and cliffside sanctuaries of the Reach, tended by women who understood the price and paid it without hesitation. Solstheim is an island that most of Tamriel has forgotten. It sits in the cold water between Skyrim and Morrowind, too far from either to feel like it belongs to both, too small to demand attention from the empires that occasionally remembered it existed. The Skaal have lived there for longer than any written record tracks. They did not build cities. They did not expand. They stayed on their island and maintained a relationship with the land that most of the outside world would struggle to categorize as religion, because it does not resemble religion in any of the ways people usually recognize it. The Skaal do not pray to a god who sits in a distant realm. They acknowledge a force they call the Allmaker, the presence they believe creates, sustains, and reclaims all living things in an unending cycle. The Allmaker is not a person. It has no appearance, no voice, no throne. It is not worshipped through ceremony or obedience, or the accumulation of favor. It is acknowledged through attention. The Skaal believe the correct response to the Allmaker's presence is simply to notice it. In the behavior of animals, the movement of water, the specific way snow settles on certain mornings. To live attentively is to live faithfully. There is no other requirement. The Allmaker stones are physical anchors of that belief. 6 of them stand at different points across Solstheim, each one associated with a specific aspect of the natural world: earth, wind, sun, sea, stone, and beast. The stones are not idols, and they are not shrines in the conventional sense. They are markers, reminders that the Allmaker's presence runs through specific natural forces, and that these forces deserve recognition. And the Skaal visit them regularly, not to make requests, not to perform rituals that produce specific outcomes, to acknowledge, to stand near the stone and be present with what it represents, and then walk back to the village carrying that awareness. When the Dragonborn DLC begins, the stones have been corrupted. One by one, they have been claimed by Miraak's influence, their surfaces covered in a dark webbing that compels any Skaal who touches them into mindless labor. The villagers walk to the stones and begin building structures that serve no purpose anyone in the village understands. They cannot stop. They cannot explain why they are doing it. They simply work until they collapse, and then get up and work again. The stones that were meant to ground the Skaal in attentive, willing connection to the world have been turned into instruments of compelled, mindless disconnection from it. The inversion is precise. Whatever force corrupted the stones understood exactly what they meant to the people who tended them, and targeted that meaning specifically. Storn Cragstrider is the shaman of the Skaal village. His role is not priest in the religious sense. There are no sermons, no congregants, no institutional structure for him to manage. He is the person in the village who carries the most knowledge of the old ways. He knows the histories, the meanings behind the traditions, the specific reasoning that underlies practices the younger villagers follow without fully understanding why. When the stones are corrupted and the villagers are taken, Storn stays free. His knowledge of the Allmaker's nature may be the reason. A deep familiarity with what the stones genuinely are perhaps offers some protection against a corruption It works by replacing that meaning with something hollow. Free is his daughter. She approaches the Dragonborn outside the first corrupted stone, moving against the flow of villagers, walking mindlessly toward it. She is the only person in the area who is not under compulsion. Her role throughout the Dragonborn questline is that of a guide. Someone who knows Solstime's geography, its dangers, and the cultural context that the Dragonborn arrives without. She carries her father's knowledge without having formally trained as a shaman. The Allmaker theology she practices is not performed. She does not conduct rituals or speak formal prayers. She simply acts in ways that reflect the Skaal understanding of how to move through the world. She is careful with resources. She does not take more than is needed. She reads the land the way someone reads a room, for what it is communicating, not just for what is visible on the surface. The Skaal have been isolated from the mainland cultures deliberately, not through hostility, but through a clear-eyed assessment that contact with those cultures historically did not go well for people who lived the way the Skaal lived. The Nine Divines theology that dominates Skyrim's religious life has no real foothold in the Skaal village. The Divines are not rejected. They are simply not part of the Skaal's framework. The Allmaker and the Divines are not in competition. They occupy different spaces in different people's understanding of how the world works. The Skaal never tried to export their beliefs. They never sent representatives to Skyrim's holds to explain the Allmaker to anyone. Their theology is, by its own nature, local. It belongs to Solstheim, the way the stones belong to Solstheim. Rooted, specific, not designed to travel. The Daedric presence on Solstheim is a different matter entirely. Hermaeus Mora's connection to the island runs through Miraak and through the Black Books, but also through a longer history of the island sitting in a part of the world where Mora's influence was never far from the surface. The Allmaker theology and Mora's domain of forbidden knowledge are not compatible frameworks. The Allmaker asks for attention and presence. Mora offers accumulation and depth at a price. The Skaal, who never sought forbidden knowledge and never looked for power beyond what the natural world offered, were never particularly interesting to Mora on an individual basis. As a collective, as a culture that maintained a specific relationship with the land for centuries without corruption, they may have represented something he found worth monitoring from a distance. Storn's death near the end of the questline is the moment the chapter earns its title. He gives his life to provide the Dragonborn with the information needed to confront Miraak. Hermaeus Mora takes the knowledge Storn has spent his life accumulating, the hidden lore of the Skaal, the deep history of the Allmaker tradition, the specific meanings behind practices that will now never be fully taught to anyone else. The exchange is completed. Mora gets what he came for. Storn dies in the snow outside the village he spent his life protecting. Freya watches. The questline does not soften the moment or redirect from it. It holds the scene long enough for the weight of it to settle. What Storn gave up was not just his life. He gave up knowledge that belonged to his people, accumulated over generations, preserved through careful teaching, and now removed from the world in a single transaction. The Skaal will continue. Freya will likely become the next keeper of what traditions remain. But the specific depth Storn carried is gone. Mora has it now, filed somewhere in Apocrypha alongside everything else he has ever collected, from everyone who ever made a trade they could not take back. The Skyha theology says all things return to the Allmaker eventually. Whether that includes knowledge taken by a Daedric prince is a question the tradition does not answer. The village is quiet after everything concludes. The stones are free again. The villagers return to themselves slowly, confused. Most of them not fully understanding what they were doing during the period of compulsion. The familiar rhythms of Skaal life resume. Hunting, preserving food against the long winter, tending the practical requirements of survival on a cold island. Freya moves through the village with the quiet authority of someone who has taken on weight they did not ask for and has decided to carry it properly regardless. She does not make speeches. She does not explain what her father meant to the village. She simply begins doing the work that needs doing. Solstheim keeps turning with the seasons. The Allmaker stones stand where they have always stood. The snow settles on them in the specific way. Snow settles on things that have been in one place for a very long time, slowly, evenly, without rushing. The island does not require acknowledgement from the mainland to continue existing. It never did. It was here before anyone from Skyrim or Morrowind paid it any attention, and it will be here long after the last ship stops making the crossing. The Skaal know this. They have always known this. It is, in its own quiet way, the oldest thing the Allmaker taught them. Solitude keeps its history in songs. Not in libraries, not in stone inscriptions, not in the careful ledgers of imperial administrators. Songs. The bards of Skyrim were not entertainers who happened to know some history. They were the history. In a culture where most people could not read, the song was the only vessel reliable enough to carry a fact across generations. Get the song right, and the fact survived. Lose the song, and the fact went with it. The Bard's College in Solitude understood this. Its students were not learning to perform. They were learning to preserve. The quest line that runs through the Bard's College begins with a problem that sounds simple and opens into something much larger. Viamo, the headmaster of the college, wants to revive the Burning of King Olaf festival. The festival has not been held for years. The Jarl of Solitude, Elisif the Fair, still grieving the death of her husband, High King Torig, has banned it. She finds the celebration disrespectful. The burning of an effigy feels wrong to her in the current political climate. Viamo needs her to change her mind. And to change her mind, he believes he needs the complete version of King Olaf's verse. A poem about the king that exists in fragments, with a crucial section missing. King Olaf One-Eye was a Nord ruler from the Second Era, a long ago period when Skyrim's holds were governed by independent kings rather than jarls serving a larger empire. He was a warrior king remembered for, among other things, capturing a dragon, not killing one, capturing one. The dragon's name was Numenex, and Olaf supposedly defeated him through sheer force of will and the power of his Thuum, his voice. He brought Numenex back to Whiterun and imprisoned the dragon in the structure now called Dragon's Reach. That story is on the record. What is less settled is what kind of man Olaf actually was, and that is precisely where the missing verse becomes important. A bard named Svafnir wrote the complete version of King Olaf's verse during the king's own lifetime. The poem was not flattering. It accused Olaf of dishonesty, of fabricating or exaggerating his victory over Numenex, of using the dragon's capture as political theatre rather than genuine heroism. Olaf had Svafnir arrested. The poem was confiscated and destroyed. Svafnir himself was imprisoned, and by most accounts died there. The fragments of the verse that survived were copies made by people who had seen or heard portions of the original before its destruction. The full text disappeared. The questline sends you to Dead Men's Respite, a Nordic barrow, to find whatever remains of Svafnir's original work. Dead Men's Respite is the kind of location Skyrim uses well. It is dark, old, and layered with the residue of a specific history. The ghost of Svafnir moves through it ahead of you. Not threatening, not dramatic, simply present. He leads the way toward his own tomb and the remains of the verse he died for. That image holds something worth noticing. A bard who was imprisoned and killed for writing the truth about a powerful man is still, centuries later, moving toward the words he wrote. The poem outlasted the king who tried to destroy it. It outlasted the man who wrote it. It survived in pieces, in copies kept by people who thought it mattered enough to preserve, even at some personal risk. What Viamo does with the recovered verse is the questline's most quietly complicated moment. The fragments you bring back are incomplete. There are still gaps in the text. Viamo fills those gaps himself, writing new lines in the style of the original, inserting content that fits the rhythm and argument of what Svafnir wrote. The finished poem is presented to Elisif as the recovered original. It is not entirely the recovered original. Some of it is Viamo's invention, shaped to serve the current political purpose of persuading the Jarl. He argues to the player that the spirit of the verse is preserved, that the new lines are faithful to what Svafnir intended. That argument is not wrong. It is also not entirely right, and the questline does not pretend otherwise. The burning of King Olaf festival, once approved, proceeds through Solitude's streets with fire and music. The effigy burns. The crowd cheers. It is a moment of genuine celebration, a tradition restored, a piece of cultural life that the city had been missing. What the questline has shown you in the process of getting there is how that tradition was built in the first place. Not from a clean, unbroken record of verified fact, from fragments, from copies of copies, from a poem that was partially reconstructed by a man with his own reasons for wanting the festival to happen. History in Skyrim, the questline suggests, has always been made this way. The songs that survive are the songs someone chose to keep. The facts that persist are the facts someone found useful enough to carry forward. The role of bards in Nordic culture runs deeper than the college's curriculum suggests. Before reading was common, before administrative records existed, before the Empire brought its bureaucratic habits to Skyrim's holds, the bard was the living archive of the community. A bard who travelled between holds carried news, genealogies, the outcomes of battles, the terms of treaties, the specific words spoken at a founding or a funeral. These were not written down and stored somewhere safe. They lived in the bard's memory, reinforced by the musical structure of the songs themselves. Rhythm and rhyme are memory tools. A fact embedded in a song is harder to lose than a fact written in a document, because the song can be sung by anyone who learned it. The document requires the reader to remain and the building to stand. Viamo's ambition threads through the questline without ever becoming its central subject. He wants the festival restored. He wants the college to matter in Solitude's political life. He genuinely loves the institution he runs and believes in its purpose. None of that is insincere, but his willingness to fill in the missing sections of Svafnir's poem, to present a partly invented text as a recovered original, reveals something about the way institutions manage their own history. The college teaches preservation. Its headmaster, in this specific moment, chose creative reconstruction over honest incompleteness. He made the call that a useful version of the truth serves the purpose better than a fragmentary version of the truth. Whether that is wisdom or compromise depends on what you think the purpose of history actually is. Svafnir wrote his poem because he believed someone in power was lying about something that mattered. He paid for that with his life. The king he wrote about is long dead. The dragon Numenex's skull still sits in Dragon's Reach, which means that part of the story, the capture at least, happened regardless of how Olaf characterized it. Whether Olaf was the hero he claimed to be, or the fabricator Svafnir accused him of being, is now genuinely unresolvable. The complete poem would not have definitively settled it. It was one bard's account, written in anger, against a king's official version written in self-interest. Two partial truths, neither one the whole picture. The festival burns the effigy every year now, and the crowds who watch it probably do not think about any of this. They see fire and tradition and a reason to gather. The layers underneath are for the people who go looking. The songs of Skyrim are still being sung in taverns and holds and around fires late at night. Most of the people singing them do not know their full histories. Who wrote them? What was changed? What was lost in the transmission? They sing because the songs are there, because someone taught them, because the music is part of the air they grew up breathing. That is how culture survives. Not through perfect preservation, through imperfect, determined, sometimes self-interested continuation. Svafnir understood that. He wrote his poem knowing it might not survive. Viamo understood it too, in his own pragmatic way, when he picked up the pen to fill in the gaps. The festival burns on, the words carry forward, and the full truth of what happened between a Nord king and a dragon in the Second Era sits quietly in the gap between what was written and what was lost, exactly where it has always been. There is a book in Skyrim called Boethiah's Proving. It does not read like a religious text. It reads like a set of instructions delivered by someone who has no patience for ceremony and no interest in being liked. The book describes what Boethiah wants from mortal followers, not devotion, not prayer, not the kind of sustained worship most Daedric princes expect. What Boethiah wants is demonstration, proof, repeated, ongoing proof that the person claiming to follow her is actually capable of the thing she values above everything else. That thing is domination through personal excellence, not cruelty for its own sake, not random violence. Something more specific, the idea that strength has no meaning unless it is tested, that a position of power is only legitimate as long as the person holding it can defend it against anyone willing to take it, and that the highest form of personal honesty is doing what you are capable of doing rather than what others expect of you. Boethiah is the prince of plots, betrayal, and the kind of ambition that does not apologize for itself. Her followers are not people who fell into darkness. They are people who looked at her framework and decided it described reality more accurately than any alternative they had been offered. The questline called Boethiah's Calling begins in one of two ways. Either you find a book that summons you, or you find the cultists themselves gathered at a stone pillar in the mountains east of Windhelm. The cultists are performing a ritual. One of them approaches and challenges you to combat, not as an act of hostility, but as a test. Boethiah's followers do not distinguish between invitation and trial. Meeting them is the trial. If you survive the encounter, you are allowed to approach the altar at the center of their camp and begin the questline properly. The altar is the first statement the questline makes about what Boethiah actually requires. It is not decorated with offerings of gold or incense, or the kinds of symbolic gifts most religious traditions use to signal devotion. It is a pillar with binding points on it. The ritual it is designed for is specific and direct. You must bring someone to the altar, someone who trusts you, someone who will follow you to this remote location, because they believe you would not lead them somewhere dangerous. You bind them to the pillar. Boethiah's power moves through you and consumes them. The person you brought as a follower becomes a vessel for the prince's voice, and then is discarded when she is finished speaking. The questline does not frame this as a tragedy. It does not linger on the death or invite reflection on the moral weight of what just happened. Boethiah's voice speaks through the dying follower and moves immediately to the next instruction. There are more cultists gathered at another location. They have been following Boethiah for years. They have proven themselves repeatedly. Now they need to be killed by you, because Boethiah requires a new champion and the current group of followers represent the old standard. They need to be replaced by someone willing to go further. The questline's logic runs in a clean, unbroken line. Everyone who gets close to Boethiah's favor eventually becomes the obstacle standing between her and the next person who wants that favor more. What Boethiah represents in Elder Scrolls cosmology is not simply evil. The designation is too simple and misses the actual argument her theology makes. She is associated with the Dunmer, the Dark Elves, in a particularly direct way. The Chimer, the ancestors of the Dunmer, counted Boethiah among their primary divine figures. She guided them away from the Somerset Isles. She taught them to value self-reliance and transformation over tradition and inherited status. Her influence on Dunmer culture runs so deep that even after the tribunal replaced the old Daedric worship as the dominant religious framework of Morrowind, echoes of Boethiah's philosophy remained in the way Dunmer society organized itself. The emphasis on house politics, the acceptance of assassination as a legitimate political tool, the belief that the strong had both the right and the responsibility to shape the world around them. The Goldbrand, or in the Dragonborn context, the Ebony Mail, is the artifact associated with Boethiah's questline in Skyrim specifically. The Ebony Mail is a heavy armor piece that poisons nearby enemies and muffles the wearer's movements. Its enchantment reflects something about Boethiah's approach. The combination of visible power and quiet movement, of something that radiates harm while remaining difficult to track. It is not flashy in the way some Daedric artifacts are flashy. It is functional in a way that rewards people who already know how to use subtlety alongside strength. The questline has no redemption arc, because redemption is not a concept that fits inside Boethiah's framework. There is no moment where the game invites you to reconsider. No NPC who appears to offer a counter-argument. No narrative voice suggesting that what you did to your follower deserves reflection. The world simply continues. Your follower is dead. You have a new quest marker. The efficiency of that transition is part of the point. Boethiah does not ask her followers to feel bad about what they do. She asks them to be honest about what they are capable of, and then do it without hesitation. Hesitation, in her framework, is the tell. It is the sign that someone does not fully believe in their own right to act. Why Boethiah has as many mortal followers as she does is a question the questline raises without answering directly. The cultists you encounter are not desperate people who ran out of better options. They are organized, trained, and are clearly capable of surviving in a remote mountain location for extended periods. They chose this. They found the book, or found other followers, or had an encounter with Boethiah's influence, and decided that what she was offering aligned with something they already believed about how the world worked. Her theology is demanding and offers no comfort. It does not promise safety, community, healing, or peace. It promises that if you are genuinely strong, not strong by accident or inheritance, but strong through continuous effort and willingness to act, that strength belongs to you in a way that nothing can take away. The pillar where the quest line begins is still standing after the quest line ends. The cultists are gone. The altar has no attendants. The mountain around it is quiet in the way mountains in Skyrim are always quiet. Old, patient, unconcerned with whatever happened at their feet. Somewhere in oblivion, Boethiah's realm exists in a state of continuous conflict. Figures fighting for position, alliances forming and breaking, the prince's attention moving from one promising candidate to the next. She is not a prince who rests. Her realm reflects her theology exactly. Everything in it is contested. Everything in it is earned over and over again, or lost to someone more willing to take it. There is no permanent winner in Boethiah's realm. There is only whoever is winning right now, and the long line of challengers behind them, waiting their turn. The book Boethiah's Proving ends with a statement that is easy to dismiss and harder to forget. It says that the world belongs to those who take it, not to those who deserve it, not to those who were given it, not to those who waited patiently for the right moment. To those who reached out and closed their hand around it. Whether that is a philosophy worth following is a question the questline leaves entirely to the person standing at the altar, follower in tow, making a decision the game never forces, but always makes available. The East Empire Company did not advertise what it actually was. Its warehouses in solitude, sat on the docks with company banners hanging above the doors. Workers moving crates in the grey morning light. Ships coming and going on schedules, maintained by clerks who kept careful records of everything. From the outside, it looked like trade. It was trade. It was also something that trade is often used to cover. The accumulation of power in places where the people living there did not fully understand what was being accumulated or by whom. The company was established with imperial backing during the Third Era, that long stretch of time when the Septim Empire held most of Tamriel under a single administrative roof. Imperial backing meant imperial protection. It meant that the company's operations in any given region carried the implicit authority of the empire behind them. Local rulers who might otherwise have questioned the company's practices found that questioning came with diplomatic costs. Merchants who might have competed with the company found that competition came with logistical obstacles that appeared mysteriously whenever the company felt threatened. The structure was not unique to the East Empire Company. It was the standard architecture of how imperial trade worked. The company was simply one of its cleaner examples. The questline in Skyrim begins with a straightforward problem. The company's Solitude warehouse has been targeted by a smuggling operation. Goods are disappearing. Someone inside the operation is helping outside parties move product through company infrastructure without company authorization or profit. Adelaisa Vendici is the company representative who brings you in to deal with it. She is direct, professional, and completely committed to the company's interests, as she understands them. She does not present herself as morally complicated. She has a job. The job is to protect company assets and recover what was taken. She hired someone capable of helping with that. The terms are simple. Adelaisa is worth spending time with because of what she represents rather than what she does. She genuinely believes in the East Empire Company, not in a naive or unexamined way. She has clearly worked within the organization long enough to know its rougher edges, but in the foundational sense. She believes that trade, conducted at scale, creates stability. That stable trade routes mean food reaches cities that would otherwise go hungry, that materials reach craftsmen who would otherwise lack them, that the connections between far apart communities built through commerce are more durable than the connections built through conquest. She is not wrong about any of that. The questline does not suggest she is wrong. It simply shows you what those same trade routes and that same organizational infrastructure were also carrying, and lets you decide what to do with the comparison. The smuggling trail leads eventually to Japhet's Folly, an island fortress sitting in the cold water off Skyrim's northern coast. Getting there requires a ship and the willingness to approach a fortified position held by people who have no interest in visitors. The Sea Wolves, a group of raiders, occupy the fortress. They are not the main discovery. The main discovery is what the fortress was used for before the Sea Wolves arrived, and what evidence remains of those earlier uses. Japhet's Folly was a private facility. Private in the specific sense of existing outside official records, outside imperial oversight, and outside any accountability structure that might require its operators to answer for what happened there. The evidence inside points toward interrogation, the physical layout of the lower levels, the restraints, the specific arrangement of certain rooms, the tools left behind, describes a layout where people were brought for information extraction rather than trial or imprisonment. The company's official position on Japhet's Folly, to the extent one exists, is that the location was an independent operation run by individuals who exceeded their authority. That position is convenient. The infrastructure required to operate Japhet's Folly, the ships to reach it, the supplies to maintain it, the personnel to staff it, did not appear without organizational support. Someone with access to company resources was involved. The questline does not identify that person by name. It leaves the implication sitting in the architecture of the place itself. The East Empire Company's relationship with the empire it served raises a question the questline touches on without fully resolving. The company was not part of the imperial government. It was a private entity that operated under imperial protection. The distinction matters legally and practically. Imperial laws that govern the treatment of subjects in the empire's territories applied to imperial agents. They applied less clearly to a private company operating under an imperial charter. The gap between those two categories, between what the law required and what the law technically covered, was where Japhet's folly existed. Not in defiance of the law, in the space the law had not yet reached. The warehouse in Solitude, by contrast, runs with bureaucratic precision. Every crate logged, every transaction recorded, every worker accountable to a supervisor, who is accountable to Adelaisa, who is accountable to the company board. The contrast between the warehouse's careful order and the fortress's purposeful disorder is not accidental. Organizations that maintain clean public operations frequently require places where things that cannot be documented get handled. The warehouse is the face. Japhet's folly was the back room. What the questline does to Adelaisa is subtle but consistent. She ends the questline with the smuggling problem resolved, and the sea wolves cleared from the fortress. The company's operations continue. She is professionally satisfied with the outcome. The questline does not force her to confront what Japhet's folly was used for, and it does not show her discovering evidence that would require a response from her. She finishes the quest with her beliefs about the company intact, whether that is because she does not know the full picture or because she has made the same calculation that most people inside large institutions make. That the good the institution does justifies the things it does quietly is left to the observer. The quest line respects her enough not to answer that question on her behalf. The company's presence in Skyrim was already diminishing by the Fourth Era. The Oblivion Crisis damaged trade infrastructure across Tamriel. The political instability that followed the crisis disrupted the imperial backing that gave the company its protection. By the time the Dragonborn is walking through Solitude, the East Empire Company warehouse has the feeling of something past its peak. Still operating, still maintaining the banners and the records and the professional demeanor, but operating in a context that no longer fully supports what it was built for. The ships still come in, the crates still move, the clerks still keep their careful logs. The empire that granted the charter is stretched thinner than it has ever been, and the fortress on the northern island sits empty now, open to whatever weather comes off the sea. Its lower levels holding whatever they hold in the dark. Trade leaves its marks on the world in ways that are different from conquest, but not always less permanent. The roads that exist because merchants needed them, the harbours that were deepened because ships needed them, the political arrangements that were made because someone needed safe passage. The East Empire Company shaped parts of Tamriel's infrastructure in ways that outlasted the company itself. The routes it opened remained open. The connections it built remained connected. The things it did, in places like Japhet's folly, remained in the stone, and the water, long after the people who authorized them had retired or died or simply moved on to other work. That is how large organizations leave the world. Not in one moment, in layers, each one quieter than the last. Windhelm is the oldest city in Skyrim. Its stone walls have stood for thousands of years. Its streets are narrow and cold, built for a people who valued permanence over comfort. The city carries its age visibly, in the weathered carvings above doorways, in the deep ruts worn into cobblestones by centuries of foot traffic, in the specific grey of walls that have absorbed generation after generation of northern winters without complaint. Most cities in Skyrim feel like they are in the middle of their own story. Windhelm feels like it is near the end of one. Something in the atmosphere of the place suggests that the interesting things already happened here long ago, and what remains is the long, quiet settling of a city into its own weight. The Blood on the Ice questline begins at night in the graveyard near the city's stone quarter. A body has been found, a young woman killed in a specific and deliberate way. The guards have gathered. A small crowd watches from a distance. The scene is lit by torch and the ambient grey-blue of a Windhelm night. And the specific combination of those lights makes everything look slightly unreal. Which, as it turns out, is appropriate. Almost nothing about this investigation is what it appears to be at first. The guards handle the discovery with the particular blend of urgency and incompetence that defines how Windhelm's security force operates throughout the questline. They are not corrupt in the straightforward sense. They are not taking bribes to look the other way. They are simply not equipped by training, by resources, or by the institutional habits of a city that has run on informal authority for a long time. To investigate something that requires patience, lateral thinking, and the willingness to question people who hold social standing in the city. Windhelm's guards are good at responding to visible problems. A fight breaks out, they break it up. Someone draws a weapon, they intervene. A serial killer who attends social gatherings and runs a respected local business is outside their operational range. The tools they have were built for different work. The wrongful arrest follows quickly. A woman named Susanna is killed. The guards, under pressure to demonstrate action, arrest the person who was last seen near the scene. A young woman named Windhelm. She is an older woman, a court mage, with an unsettling reputation among people who find educated women unsettling. She fits the profile the guards can construct with the limited information they have gathered. She is arrested, held, and the investigation effectively closes in the guards' minds. The case is solved. Someone is in custody. The killings will presumably stop. They do not stop. Another body appears while Windhelm sits in the dungeon, and the questline forces a reckoning with what the arrest actually was. A performance of resolution rather than resolution itself. Calixto Corium runs the House of Curiosities in Windhelm's Market District. It is a small museum of sorts. A collection of objects from across Tamriel, displayed in cases with hand-lettered descriptions, admission charged at the door, visitors welcomed by Calixto himself, with the specific enthusiasm of someone who has thought a great deal about each item and rarely gets the chance to discuss them with anyone genuinely interested. He is friendly. He is knowledgeable. He answers questions with the practiced ease of someone who has answered the same questions many times and still finds them worth answering. He's also, by the time you meet him, already several murders deep into a plan he has been working on for years without anyone noticing. His sister's name was Jerin. She travelled with him for most of his adult life, the two of them moving between cities, collecting objects, building the inventory that eventually became the House of Curiosities. The specifics of how she died are not fully documented in the questline. What is documented is what Calixto believes, or came to believe, sometime after her death. He found an amulet. The amulet, which he will offer to sell you during the investigation, describing it as a curiosity called Wheelstone, is, in reality, a necromantic artifact connected to the act of soul entrapment. Calixto became convinced that the amulet, combined with a specific ritual, could return his sister to life. The ritual required components he did not have. Getting those components required the deaths of women in Windhelm, killed in a specific manner, in specific locations, at intervals timed to the ritual's requirements. The questline hides this in plain sight with a precision that rewards players who pay attention to the texture of their interactions, rather than just the quest markers. Calixto is present throughout the investigation. He is available for conversation. He offers the amulet for sale, the central artifact of his entire operation, and describes it as something mundane. When you bring it to other characters for identification, the quest line routes you toward a misidentification that keeps Calixto's secret intact for another stage of the investigation. He attends the same spaces you move through. He expresses appropriate concern about the murders when the subject comes up. He performs the role of concerned community member with the fluency of someone who has been performing it for so long it no longer requires conscious effort. The necromancer connection runs through Wundfirth as well, which is why the guards' reasoning about her seemed plausible, even if their methods were not. Wundfirth genuinely studies magic that most of Windhelm's residents find uncomfortable. His quarters contain books and materials that, taken out of context, suggest the kind of interests the guards were looking for. The questline uses this overlap deliberately. The person who looks like the answer and the person who is the answer occupy adjacent spaces in the city's social geography, and the investigation's challenge is learning to read the difference between someone who studies dark subjects academically and someone who has moved from study into practice. Viola Giordano is the other named figure the questline circles around. She is a Windhelm resident who has been following the murders obsessively, keeping her own records, watching the investigation, pushing anyone who will listen to take the case more seriously. Her involvement began as civic concern and has deepened into something that takes up most of her attention and emotional energy. She has theories. She shares them readily. Some of them are wrong in specific ways that misdirect the investigation if you follow them too closely. Viola is not obstructing the investigation deliberately. She is doing what someone does when they are deeply invested in a problem they cannot solve and have more time than expertise. Accumulating information, pattern matching aggressively, and becoming increasingly certain that the conclusions she has reached are correct. The relationship between Viola's obsession and Calixto's quiet methodical operation is one of the questline's more understated details. She has been watching, he has been operating. Both of them have been present in the same city, circling the same events, for the entire duration of the killings. Viola collected information about the case. Calixto collected the components his ritual required. Two different kinds of accumulation, running in parallel, neither one fully aware of the other's true nature. The questline puts you in the position of moving between them, receiving Viola's theories, visiting Calixto's museum, talking to the guards, consulting Wundfirth, and assembling the picture from pieces that no single character in the city has the full version of. The graveyard where the questline begins is worth returning to as a location rather than just a starting point. Windhelm's relationship with its dead is layered in the way the city itself is layered. The oldest graves near the walls date back to periods of the city's history that most current residents know only as general eras rather than specific events. The newer graves sit closer to the center. The tending of the graveyard falls to whoever in the city's religious structure takes responsibility for it. And in Windhelm's current state, that responsibility is handled inconsistently. The Hall of the Dead exists. The proper rites are performed. But the graveyard itself has the feel of a space that receives less attention than the city's political and economic life demands. The dead are honored in principle. In practice, the city has other concerns. Calixto's use of the graveyard as a location, the proximity of his killings to a place where the dead are officially kept and officially managed, carries a logic consistent with his overall approach. He operated near the visible, official systems of the city, precisely because those systems were not designed to look at what was happening right beside them. The graveyard is watched over. The guards patrol near it. The Hall of the Dead maintains records of who is buried there. None of those systems were configured to notice a man conducting a parallel set of transactions in the same general space, because he moved through the space as a recognized, unthreatening member of the community who had every normal reason to be present. The resolution of the questline involves catching Calixto in the act, following the evidence to its conclusion and confronting him before he completes the ritual with one final killing. He does not confess when cornered. He does not explain himself or ask to be understood. He attempts to complete what he came to do, and the questline ends with him stopped by force rather than persuaded or redeemed. There is no version of this ending where Calixto steps back from the ritual and acknowledges the harm he caused. The questline understands that grief of the specific kind he carries, the kind that has been turned inward and transformed over years into a project, a plan, a set of steps that feel like the only remaining form of agency, does not tend to respond to argument at the moment of confrontation. What the questline leaves behind after Calixto is stopped and Woundfirth is freed and the investigation officially closes is a city that has not substantially changed. The guards resume their patrols. The market district continues its business. The House of Curiosities sits closed, its contents presumably remaining in their cases. The hand-lettered descriptions, still accurate for everything except the amulet that was never what Calixto claimed it was. Viola moves through the city without a case to follow for the first time in a long time. The graveyard receives its new residents in the ordinary way. Windhelm returns to the long, slow process of being itself. Ancient, cold, carrying more history than any of its current inhabitants fully know, and moving forward anyway because that is what cities do, regardless of what happened in them. The brother who missed his sister. The curator who built a museum and a cover simultaneously. The collector who understood, somewhere in the part of him that had not been taken over by the plan, that what he was doing was not something the world would excuse. All of that lived in the same person who smiled at visitors and answered questions about the objects in his cases with genuine warmth. People contain more than one thing at a time. Windhelm understands this in its old stone way. It has seen enough of what people are capable of to have stopped being surprised. It just keeps standing, cold, patient, waiting for whatever comes next. Most Daedric princes want something from mortals. Worship, service, entertainment, souls, secrets, suffering. The specific currency varies, but the basic transaction is consistent. A mortal approaches. The prince offers power or knowledge or favor. The mortal gives something in return. And the relationship continues on those terms for as long as both parties find it useful. Meridia does not fit this pattern. She does not collect mortal souls. She does not maintain a network of cultists performing rituals on her behalf. She does not appear in dreams or whisper at crossroads or leave artifacts in dungeons for curious adventurers to find. What she does instead is something that has no real equivalent among the other princes. She keeps a temple. She tends a specific piece of the mortal world. She cares about what happens inside it in a way that is personal rather than transactional. Kiltcreath Temple sits on a hillside west of Solitude. Its exterior is weathered and quiet in the way old stone structures become quiet, when they have been undisturbed for a long time. The approach to it feels like walking towards something that has been waiting, not impatiently, not urgently, but with the specific quality of patience that belongs to things that measure time in centuries rather than years. The temple was built in Meridia's honor and dedicated to the principle she embodies, living light as the fundamental expression of what it means to exist fully and honestly in the world. The worshippers who built it and tended it were not performing a transaction. They were participating in something they understood as the opposite of transaction. Meridia's light, in their theology, was not a reward for correct behavior. It was simply what life looked like when it was not being corrupted by something trying to hollow it out. Meridia's position among the Daedric princes is genuinely unusual and worth sitting with before the questline itself is examined. The princes exist outside of mortal moral frameworks. They are not good or evil in the way mortals use those words, because those categories require a relationship to consequence and mortality that the princes do not have. Most of them occupy their domains with complete indifference to how mortals categorize their influence. Sanguine does not consider himself harmful. Viamina does not consider herself cruel. Molag Bal does not consider himself anything. He simply is what he is. And the suffering that follows his influence is the natural result of what he values, not a side effect he regrets. Meridia is different in a specific way. She has a position, she holds it consistently, and applies it to her own kind as readily as she applies it to mortals. Undeath is an abomination, not because it violates a rule she was given, because it takes something that was alive, genuinely, fully alive, with all the weight and presence that living carries, and replaces that aliveness with a hollow continuation that mimics life without containing it. That distinction between living and the hollow continuation of form after life has left is the theological center of everything Meridia represents. A Draugr moves. A shade follows instructions. A risen corpse performs the physical actions it performed in life. None of these things are alive in Meridia's understanding. They are occupied. Something else has moved into the space where a life used to be and is running the physical machinery without any of what made that machinery worth running. To Meridia, this is not simply unpleasant or unfortunate. It is the specific kind of wrongness that she has organized her entire existence around opposing. Her light does not simply illuminate dark spaces. It is actively incompatible with what Undeath requires to function. Undead cannot exist comfortably in her presence. Her beams of light damage them not as a weapon effect, but as a fundamental incompatibility between what she is and what they are. Malkoran arrived at Kilcreath Temple during the chaos that followed the Great War, the conflict between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion that reshaped Tamriel's political landscape in the years before the events of Skyrim. He was a powerful necromancer. He came to the temple not because he had any relationship with Meridia or any interest in what the temple represented. He came because it was a structure with thick walls, a defensible position, and the residual magical energy of a long-tended sacred site that he could redirect toward his own purposes. Sacred sites accumulate power over time. The worship and attention and genuine spiritual engagement of generations of believers leaves something in the stone. Malkoran wanted that accumulated energy. The fact that it belonged to a Daedric prince was, from his perspective, a complication he was prepared to manage. He filled the temple with shades, the corrupted remnants of soldiers who died during the war and were subsequently raised by Malkoran's craft. These was not Draugr animated by ancient burial customs or the residual enchantments of Nordic tombs. They were recent dead, pulled out of whatever transition their deaths had begun, and locked into service inside a building that stood for everything opposed to what had been done to them. The specific horror of that arrangement: soldiers who died in a war, denied whatever came next for them, imprisoned in a temple dedicated to living light and forced to defend a necromancers operating against everything that temple stood for, is something the questline does not pause to explain. It shows you the shades and lets the context do the rest. Meridia's beacon is how the questline begins. You find it, or it finds you, in the way Daedric artifacts have, of placing themselves in the path of people who will do something with them. The beacon is a sphere of pale light, warm to look at, completely unlike the cold blues and greys of most magical objects in Skyrim. Meridia's voice arrives when you pick it up. It is not the voice of a patient, gentle deity. It is direct. It states what happened to the temple and what she requires with the efficiency of someone who has been waiting for the right person to arrive and has no interest in pleasantries. Now that the wait is over, carry the beacon to the temple. Restore the light beams that Malkoran disrupted. Clear the corruption from the chambers. The instructions are clear. The expectation behind them is clear. Meridia does not ask. She has moved past asking by the time she reaches you. The temple interior runs on a specific mechanical logic that mirrors the theological one. Meridia's light enters through channels cut into the architecture, beams that travel through the building when properly aligned, illuminating everything they touch and making the spaces they fill hostile to the undead Malkoran stationed there. Progressing through the temple requires restoring those beams one section at a time, finding the mechanism that redirects the light, activating it, watching the beam extend through a newly cleared corridor and strike the shades sheltering in the dark beyond. The gameplay and the theology run together without awkwardness. Bringing the light back is literally what you are doing, and also exactly what you are doing in the larger sense that the quest line operates on. Meridia lifts you into the air above the temple when you reach the final chamber. It is one of the few moments in Skyrim where a Daedric prince physically demonstrates their power over the space you occupy, rather than simply speaking from a distance. She holds you above the roof of the temple and speaks again. Still direct, still without warmth in the conventional sense, but with something that functions like satisfaction. The corruption is cleared, Malkoran is dead. The temple can return to what it was built to be. She gives you Dawnbreaker, a sword whose enchantment causes undead to explode in a burst of light when killed, spreading that burst to nearby undead and potentially setting off a chain reaction through groups of them. The weapon is the theology made functional. It does not simply destroy undead. It uses their destruction to spread the thing they cannot tolerate. Why Meridia openly opposes other Daedric influences is a question that has no clean answer in the lore, and several interesting partial ones. Some scholars who study Daedric theology suggest that Meridia was not always what she is now, that she was at some earlier point in existence, something closer to the standard Daedric profile, and that her current orientation toward living light and opposition to Undeath represents a change rather than an original state. Some suggest she was associated, in ancient and poorly documented sources, with the concept of magical energy in its purest form. Not light specifically, but the animating force that magic draws on, which living things possess and undead things do not. If that reading is correct, her hatred of Undeath is not a moral position adopted from outside. It is a natural consequence of what she is. Undead things are, in that framework, an offense to her the way silence is an offense to sound. Not because silence is evil, but because it is the absence of the thing that defines her. Her distance from other Daedric princes is consistent and notable. She does not appear in the same questlines as Maroons Dagon, Molag Bal, or Boethiah. She does not compete with them for territory, or followers, or influence in the way some princes do. She maintains her temple and her domain with a self-sufficiency that suggests she does not need the social architecture of Daedric politics to remain what she is. Whether this makes her trustworthy from a mortal perspective is a different question. She is helpful within the specific context of her questline. She is clear about what she wants and honest about what she will give in return. She does not deceive the people who work with her. She also does not particularly care about them beyond their usefulness to the task. Dawnbreaker is a genuine gift. Her attention, once the temple is cleared, moves on. You were the right person at the right moment. The moment has passed. The temple is clean. That is sufficient. Kilcreath Temple, after the quest line, has a different quality than it had before. The light moves through it correctly now. The channels carry the beams the way they were built to carry them. The shades are gone. The stone is still old and weathered and marked by what happened inside it during the occupation. Those marks do not disappear with Malkaran's death, but the fundamental character of the place has been restored to something that matches what it was built to be. Visiting it after the questline ends, with the beams crossing the interior and the warmth of Meridia's light filling the chambers, is one of the quieter rewards the game offers. Not a dramatic transformation, just a place returned to itself. The light in the temple does not ask anything of the person standing in it. It does not require belief or obedience, or the performance of ritual. It simply exists in the space, doing what light does, revealing the surfaces of things, making the room navigable, making the dark manageable. Meridia built her theology around something that's simple, not a promise of power or salvation or secret knowledge, just the insistence that living things deserve to remain living, that the space a life occupied deserves to remain that space rather than being converted into something else, and that the light which makes all of that visible is worth defending against anything that would prefer the dark. The temple stands, the light holds. Outside, the hillside catches whatever sun comes through Skyrim's clouds. Down below, the road to solitude carries its usual traffic of merchants and guards and travellers who do not look up at the temple as they pass. Inside, the beams cross the chambers in the specific angles the builders designed them to cross. Malkaran is ash. The soldiers he raised have been released into whatever was waiting for them before he interrupted, and Meridia's attention has moved on to wherever it moves when the immediate work is finished, leaving behind a clean temple and a sword that carries her disagreement with Undeath encoded in its edge. Not every story in Skyrim belongs to a city with high walls and a powerful Jarl, and a name that appears in imperial records going back centuries. Some of the most complete pictures of how this province actually works, how power moves, how communities survive, how ordinary people manage threats that no one powerful enough to help will ever hear about, exist in the smallest holds, places that the Empire checks on occasionally, and otherwise leaves to handle themselves. Places where the Jarl is the only authority for miles in any direction, and the guards number in single digits, and the problems that arrive do not come with instructions for how to address them. Dawnstar sits on the northern coast of Skyrim, facing water cold enough to kill quickly and weather that makes most of the year feel like the world is actively discouraging habitation. The town exists because of what is under it, rather than what surrounds it. The iron mine is the reason Dawnstar functions as a settlement rather than a waypoint. The mine produces ore that moves through trade routes to smiths across the province. The income from that ore pays the guards, maintains the buildings, and keeps the town viable through winters that would otherwise make the calculation of staying versus leaving very close. Everything in Dawnstar runs on the mine. The mine runs on the miners. And the miners, when the questline begins, are not going into the mine. The conflict between Skaal the Elder and his workforce is the questline that most players either resolve quickly or walk past without fully engaging. Skald is the Jarl of Dawnstar, an old man with strong opinions about the Empire, strong loyalty to the Stormcloak cause, and a governing style that runs on authority rather than consultation. He believes the miners are being cowardly. They believe they are being practical. The mine has a problem. Rival factions among the workers, a dispute about conditions, a sense among the miners that Skald's priorities do not include their safety or their concerns. Skald's response to all of this is to frame it as weakness and demand the men return to work. The men do not return to work. The standoff continues. What the questline reveals about Skald through this conflict is worth more attention than the conflict itself. He is not a corrupt ruler. He does not steal from the town or abuse his position for personal enrichment. He is a man who came to power in a specific era, developed a specific understanding of what leadership required, and has not updated that understanding as the world changed around him. His model of governance is command-based. The Jarl decides, the people comply, problems are solved through the application of clear authority. That model works in certain conditions. It does not work when the problem is not a question of will, but a question of something the workers know, and the Jarl does not. The miners understand the mine. They understand what has changed inside it, and why that change matters. Skald understands loyalty and duty, and the importance of not showing weakness. These two understandings are talking past each other, and the town is running short on iron ore while they do. The nightmare curse running through Dawnstar simultaneously adds a layer to the political picture that the mine conflict alone does not provide. The town's residents are not sleeping. They are exhausted in the specific way that comes from nights spent in the grip of dreams that leave no rest behind them. A population that cannot sleep is a population that makes worse decisions, tolerates worse conditions, and has less capacity to manage problems that require sustained attention and clear thinking. Skald's intransigence about the mine may be partly a product of the same curse affecting everyone else. A man whose judgment was already rigid, becoming more rigid under the additional pressure of chronic sleeplessness. The questline does not make this argument explicitly. It places these two storylines in the same town at the same time and leaves the connection available for anyone who looks for it. The Iron Mine questline and the Nightmare questline are technically separate. They share a location and a population, but they do not share a resolution path. Fixing the mine conflict does not cure the nightmares. Curing the nightmares does not fix the mine conflict. Dawnstar is a town with two simultaneous problems, neither of which is aware of the other, and both of which are making the town's overall situation worse in ways that compound. This is how smallholds actually work. Problems do not arrive one at a time and wait politely for the previous one to be resolved. They arrive together, interact in ways no one planned for, and demand attention from a governing structure that has limited capacity to address more than one thing at once. Skald is managing a labor dispute and a supernatural crisis with the same small staff and the same limited resources. The fact that he is managing both of them badly does not mean the situation is simple. Morthal sits in the middle of a swamp. That is not a metaphor. The town is physically surrounded by marsh, cold, foggy ground that does not drain properly, and supports a landscape of dead trees, shallow water, and the specific kind of stillness that belongs to places where visibility is low and sound travels strangely. The road to Morthal exists, technically. Traveling it feels like the road is a suggestion rather than a commitment. The town at the end of it is small. A few buildings, a mill on the water, the Jarl's longhouse, a handful of residents who have reasons for being in a place most people would choose to leave. Morthal does not have the same economic anchor that Dawnstar has. The mill provides some income. The surrounding land provides hunting and some agriculture. The town persists more through habit and attachment than through obvious, practical advantage. The burned house is the first questline anchor in Morthal. A building in the center of town burned down. A woman and her daughter died in the fire. The woman's husband, Haroga, moved another woman into the house almost immediately after the deaths, which the town found indecent at minimum and suspicious at maximum. The guards investigated in the way Morthal's guards investigate things, which is to say they reached a conclusion consistent with the simplest available explanation and closed the matter. The fire was an accident. Haroga's behavior is inappropriate but not criminal. The case is settled. Several residents of the town do not believe the case is settled, and the questline begins with one of them. A young girl named Helgi, whose ghost is hiding in the ruins of the burned house, asking to play a game at night. Helgi's ghost is the questline's most unexpected element, and also its most effective one. She speaks like a child. She uses the language of play. She asks you to find her before someone else does. The combination of childlike speech and the context of her death creates an atmosphere the questline maintains carefully. Not horror, not sadness exactly, but the specific unease of something that should not be happening, handled with more normalcy than it deserves, which is somehow worse than drama would be. Following her instructions leads to her actual burial site and to the truth of what happened in the house. The fire was not an accident. Rogger's behavior is not simply inappropriate. The new woman in his life is a vampire. She influenced him through her power. The fire was set deliberately. Helgi and her mother were killed to clear the way. Movarth's lair sits in the forest outside Morthal. It is an old structure, not a Nordic ruin, not a Dwemer facility, but a cave system that has been modified over time into something functional and inhabited. Movarth himself is a vampire of considerable age and ability. He has been in the area for long enough to have established a network of influence that reaches into the town without the town being fully aware of it. The woman in Rogger's house is part of that network. The questline asks you to deal with Movarth and his operation, using information gathered from the investigation in town and from a scholar named Phalion who lives in Morthal and studies vampirism with a detachment that the other residents find suspicious, and which turns out to be exactly the kind of knowledge the situation requires. Phalion's presence in Morthal is its own small story. He chose to live in a swamp town specifically because the distance from academic institutions and population centers gives him room to study things that other scholars find uncomfortable without constant interference. He is not a vampire. He is not allied with Movarth. He is a researcher who followed his subject matter to a location that provided access to relevant information and who accepts the social cost of living somewhere that views him with permanent low-level suspicion as the price of that access. The town tolerates him because he is occasionally useful. He tolerates the town because it leaves him alone most of the time. The arrangement works through mutual disinterest rather than mutual regard. Jarl Idrod Ravencroft governs Morthal. She is among the most distinctive Jarls in Skyrim, not because of her political position or her military record, but because of how she makes decisions. Idgrod has visions. She sees things, fragments of future events, impressions of distant places, images that arrive without context, and leave her to determine what they mean and whether they require action. She does not hide this. She mentions it openly when asked and describes the experience with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing a natural faculty rather than a supernatural one. She governs based partly on what these visions show her, filtered through her own judgment about how much weight to give an impression versus the direct information available from her advisors and the guards and the residents who bring her problems. The questline does not validate or invalidate Idgrod's visions as a governing tool. It simply shows you a ruler who uses them. Her handling of the burned house situation, her willingness to let the investigation proceed despite pressure to accept the guard's original conclusion, is consistent with someone who knew something was not resolved even when the official record said otherwise. Whether that knowing came from a vision or from ordinary political experience or from simple stubbornness is not clarified. Idgrod does not clarify it herself. She acts on what she knows and lets others categorize the source of that knowledge however they prefer. What Morthal and Dawnstar share, beyond their size and their distance from the centers of imperial attention, is a governing structure that has adapted to operating without external support. The Empire's presence in both holds is nominal. There are no imperial garrisons, no imperial administrators, no steady flow of resources from Cyrodiil. The Jarls manage with what the holds produce. The problems they face are solved or not solved, with the people and the knowledge locally available. Skold's rigidity and Idgrod's visions are different responses to the same underlying condition. Holding authority in a place where authority has no institutional backing beyond the willingness of the people around you to accept it. Skald responds by projecting confidence and refusing to show uncertainty. Idgrod responds by acknowledging the limits of conventional knowledge and drawing on whatever other sources she has available. Neither approach is obviously superior. Both of them are adaptations to the same difficult situation. The small holds of Skyrim carry histories that the larger cities do not need to preserve because the larger cities have institutions for preservation. Libraries, colleges, administrative records going back generations. Morthal's history lives in the memories of its oldest residents and in the physical landscape. The ruins visible from certain points on the road. The stories attached to specific trees and stones that are passed down without ceremony because no one has thought to make them official. Dawnstar's history is similar. The mine has been there for a long time. The coastal position has made it a waypoint for longer than that. But the records that would document what happened there across the centuries are sparse. And the oral tradition that might have preserved what the records missed has thinned as the population has moved and changed over time. Walking through either town slowly, not following a quest marker, not optimizing a path, just walking and noticing, reveals a texture that the quest lines only partially capture. The quality of light on the water outside Morthal in the early morning, before the fog comes in. The sound of the mine in Dawnstar faintly audible from the road when the workers have returned and the operation is running again. The specific way Idgrod sits in her longhouse chair, not quite comfortable, not quite still, like someone who is always partially elsewhere, regardless of where her body is located. Skald at his table, convinced he is right, wearing the expression of a man who has been right before, and expects to be right again, and does not see why this time would be different. These are the holds that history does not record carefully. Their problems do not change the course of empires. Their resolutions do not appear in chronicles. The vampire under the swamp is dealt with. The mine dispute is resolved. The nightmares end. The town continues. The swamp continues. The cold coast continues. And the people who live in these places wake up the next morning and go about the work of staying alive in difficult conditions with limited resources and a governing structure that is doing its best with what it has, which is, when you set aside everything else, what most of the world is doing most of the time. Skyrim has a basement. Most players do not find it until the main quest sends them there specifically. And even then, the scale of what they find tends to stop them for a moment, before the quest objectives pull their attention forward again. Blackreach is not a dungeon in the way Skyrim uses dungeons. It is not a cave system, or a ruin, or a mineshaft. It is a space the size of a small region, an underground world with its own atmosphere, its own light sources, its own ecosystem of strange fungi and blind creatures, and the remnants of two separate civilizations that occupied the same territory at different times without ever fully understanding each other. The game hides Blackreach behind a specific mechanism. You cannot stumble into it. You cannot find it by exploring caves and following tunnels until you break through into something larger. Access requires a Dwemer artifact, the attunement sphere, that opens specific locked gates in specific Dwemer ruins. The gates are there if you know to look for them. They are invisible as entry points if you do not. The questline that sends you to Blackreach is the first time most players learn the gates exist at all. That design choice is deliberate and its effect is precise. The first time Blackreach opens is the first time it is possible to find it. which means the first experience of descending into that space carries full surprise, regardless of how thoroughly the player has explored the surface world above. The game waited until this moment to show you this. The game was keeping a secret. The scale becomes apparent gradually as you descend. The ceiling is high enough that the distant luminescence of the large bulbous fungi near the top of the cavern looks like a diffuse, blue-tinted sky. The structures below are dwemer, towers, and buildings and walkways built in the angular, mechanical aesthetic the dwemer applied to everything, here extended across a space so large that the full extent of it is not visible from any single point. Falmer move through the lower areas. Dwemer automatons patrol the paths between structures. The whole environment hums with the residual energy of machinery that has been running without maintenance or human oversight for thousands of years, performing whatever functions it was built to perform because the instructions it was given have never been countermanded, and no one capable of countermanding them remains. The Falmer in Blackreach are not simply the blind, aggressive creatures encountered in ordinary Dwemer ruins. They are, in a sense, the descendants of the original population that the Dwemer enslaved and reshaped. The Snow Elves who accepted the Dwemer's offer of refuge were given food that gradually destroyed their sight. They were put to work in the Dwemer's underground facilities. Over generations, the combination of darkness, engineered dependence, and deliberate sensory deprivation changed them into something the Dwemer found more manageable. Creatures without the capacity for the kind of organized resistance that a sighted, cognitively intact population might eventually mount. Blackreach was one of the spaces where that transformation happened, and where its results were put to use. The Falmer ruins that predate the Dwemer occupation are visible in Blackreach if you look for them in the right sections of the cavern. They are different from the Dwemer architecture surrounding them in ways that are immediately recognizable once you know what to look for. The Dwemer, built with straight lines and right angles, and the specific vocabulary of a civilization that understood engineering as the primary mode of interaction with the physical world. The older structures in Blackreach are curved organic, built from materials that suggest a different relationship to the underground environment, one of working with the stone rather than imposing a predetermined geometry onto it. These are the remains of a civilization that chose to live underground and built accordingly, not a civilization that moved underground because circumstances required it and brought its above-ground architectural assumptions with it. Those older ruins represent a period in Falmer history that most of Skyrim's present-day population does not know existed. The Snow Elves who became Falmer under Dwemer influence were not a people without culture or architecture, or a developed relationship to the landscape they inhabited. They had cities, they had craft traditions, they had a way of building that reflected how they understood the world. All of that was present before the Dwemer arrived, and all of it was gradually submerged. First by the Dwemer occupation and the deliberate reshaping of the Falmer population, then by the Dwemer's own disappearance, which left the transformed Falmer without the structure that had, however brutally, organized their lives. The ruins in Blackreach are the physical record of what existed before the first layer of loss. They sit underneath the Dwemer architecture, the way the Dwemer architecture sits underneath the surface. Another floor in a building whose upper levels nobody remembers. The tower at the center of Blackreach is called the Tower of Miraak. It is the structure the main quest sends you to specifically. Inside it is the mechanism that allows an Elder Scroll to be read safely, or at least more safely than the alternative. The tower is the functional heart of the Questlines' time in Blackreach, but the space surrounding it is not simply a delivery mechanism for the tower. It is a location with its own depth and its own questions. most of which the main quest does not stop to address. The quest gives you a destination, what you do with everything between the entrance, and that destination depends entirely on how much time you are willing to spend underground. Volthuriol is found in the deepest section of Blackreach, near the center of the cavern. He is not visible on approach. He is not marked on any map. The mechanism for finding him is specific, and, on a first playthrough, almost certainly discovered by accident. There is a large resonance crystal suspended above the central plaza of Blackreach. Using a shout, specifically the unrelenting force shout, on the crystal causes it to ring at a frequency that wakes Volthuriol from wherever he has been waiting. He emerges from the ground or from the shadows of the cavern ceiling, fully formed, immediately hostile, a dragon in an underground space that was not built to contain a dragon in combat. His name in the dragon language translates roughly to obscured by shade. The name suggests he was known, at some point, to someone who understood the language well enough to give him a descriptive title rather than an arbitrary one. Whether the Dwemer named him, or whether he carried the name from before his time in Blackreach, or whether the name describes his situation rather than his character. Sealed in darkness, hidden from the surface world, his existence unknown to the people walking above, is not answered anywhere in the game's text. The name sits there as a fact without a story attached. He is the obscured one. He has been obscured for a very long time. The resonance crystal is the only thing in the entire cavern capable of reaching through that obscurity and pulling him back into the world where he can be found. The Dwemer's relationship with dragons is one of the less examined aspects of Dwemer history, partly because the evidence for it is sparse, and partly because the Dwemer's disappearance removed the people who could have explained their intentions. What Volthuriol's presence in Blackreach suggests is that the relationship existed and that it was not simply adversarial. The Dwemer did not appear to worship dragons or acknowledge them as divine in the way the dragon cult did. The Dwemer worshipped nothing. Their philosophical position was that the gods, if they existed, were simply powerful entities that had not yet been understood and engineered around. But a dragon sealed inside an underground facility suggests an attempt to keep the dragon available for some purpose, rather than to simply remove a threat by killing it. Volthuriol is not in a cage. He is in a space. The resonance crystal is the key to that space, which implies the Dwemer built the mechanism to control access to him. They could wake him when they needed to, and leave him sealed when they did not. What they needed him for is not recorded anywhere accessible. The possibilities run from the practical, a dragon's fire and physical power as a weapon or a tool in specific circumstances, to the theoretical, which involves the Dwemer's known interest in the nature of souls and their ongoing project of transforming living things into something more mechanically predictable. A dragon's soul is different from a mortal soul in ways that Dwemer soul research would presumably find relevant. Whether Volthuriol was a research subject, a weapon in reserve, a bargaining piece in some negotiation that never concluded, or something the records no longer describe, is genuinely open. His presence is confirmed. His purpose is not. The fungi that light Blackreach produce a glow that sits somewhere between blue and green, depending on the angle. They are not the only light source in the cavern, but they are the most pervasive one, covering enough of the walls and ceiling that the space never falls into true darkness, even in sections far from the Dwemer structures. This constant low light creates an environment that functions as a complete ecosystem. Plants grow, creatures live their full lives. The physical processes that require light occur in a space that the sun has never reached. Blackreach is not dark in the way that underground spaces are usually dark. It is lit by something that learned to grow in the absence of sunlight and replaced it with something dimmer and stranger. and entirely sufficient for everything that needed to happen down here. The question of whether Blackreach was always a single connected space, or whether the Dwemer expanded an existing cave system into its current form, is not answered definitively in the available lore. The presence of pre-Dwemer Falmer ruins suggests the space existed before the Dwemer arrived, at least in part. The scale of the Dwemer construction suggests significant modification over whatever natural formation originally existed. The truth is probably somewhere between discovery and creation. The Dwemer found a large underground space and made it larger, found existing gen structures and built around them, found a population already living below ground, and reorganized that population into the workforce the expansion required. Leaving Blackreach after the quest line is finished is a different experience than entering it. The descent was surprising. The exit is retrospective. You move back up through the Dwemer mechanisms, back through the locked gates, back into the surface ruins, and then out into Skyrim's sky, which looks different for a moment after the cavern's blue-green light. Brighter, wider, more open than it seemed before you spent time somewhere with a ceiling. The surface world has not changed. The sun is where it was. The wind is doing what it does. But the knowledge that all of it is sitting on top of Blackreach, on top of those ruins, and that dragon, and those thousands of years of two civilizations worth of history, sits differently than it did before you went down. Beneath Skyrim, the fungi keep glowing. Volthariol, if he was killed, is gone. If he was somehow avoided, he is still there in the dark of the cavern, waiting for a sound at the right frequency to pull him back up into the light. The Falmer move through the lower sections, following whatever patterns they follow. The Dwemer machines run their cycles. The old ruins from before the Dwemer arrived hold their curved walls and their organic geometry in the sections of the cavern that nobody visits. Two civilizations stacked on top of each other, both of them gone in different ways. Both of them still present in the physical evidence they left behind. The city below the city. Quiet, deep, patient in the way that only things with no concept of waiting can be patient. Because they are not waiting for anything. They are simply still there. Every tavern in Skyrim has a stranger in it. Someone sitting at a corner table with a drink they are not rushing through, watching the room with the specific quality of attention that belongs to people who find other people genuinely interesting rather than merely useful. Most of the time, that stranger is exactly what they appear to be. A traveler, a merchant, a mercenary between contracts, someone passing through who needed a warm room and a meal, and found the conversation that came with it tolerable or better. Occasionally, the stranger is something else entirely. Occasionally, the stranger has been sitting at that corner table in various taverns, across various holds, for longer than the concept of taverns has existed, and the drink in front of them is less a beverage than a prop, and the attention they are paying to the room is the attention of someone who has decided that this particular night, in this particular place, is going to be interesting in a way the other people in the room have not yet been informed of. Samgaven sits at a table in whatever tavern the Dragonborn happens to be in when the questline triggers. He is unremarkable in appearance. Middle-aged, slightly built, the kind of face that does not demand attention and does not refuse it either. He has a drink. He has a proposition. He wants to see if the person across from him can keep up with him through a drinking contest. And if they can, he will give them a staff. The terms are simple. The contest begins. And then the chapter in the Dragonborn's memory ends, and a new one begins somewhere entirely different, with no connecting tissue between the last clear moment and the present one. The missing morning is the questline's central mechanism and its central joke running simultaneously. You wake up, or rather, you find yourself already awake, already standing, already in the middle of a situation, with no memory of how you arrived. The location is wrong. The time is wrong. Other people are present who clearly have opinions about what happened the previous night, and those opinions are not flattering. The quest line that follows is a reconstruction. You move from location to location, collecting pieces of an evening you cannot remember, assembling a sequence of events from the accounts of witnesses who were present for the parts you were not conscious of. Every account reveals something. Every reveal is worse than the previous one, in a way that is structured less like a mystery and more like a joke with a very long setup. The trail runs across multiple holds. A wedding was disrupted. A goat was involved in something that required it to be on a roof. A giant named Morvunskar became temporarily acquainted with the Dragonborn's activities. A temple was affected in ways that the priestess responsible for it found difficult to categorize using the official language of temple incident reports. The specifics are funny. What holds them together as more than a collection of funny incidents is the consistent response of the people the questline asks you to speak with. They are annoyed. Some of them are significantly annoyed. None of them are unreachable. The wedding couple forgives the disruption. The priestess accepts the help to restore what was damaged. The people who were inconvenienced, or embarrassed, or briefly put out by whatever happened that night are, almost universally, willing to let it go. That pattern of forgiveness is not accidental. The questline is built around it. Sanguine could have designed an evening of chaos that left lasting damage. Real harm, real loss. The kind of night that ends friendships and starts feuds and leaves marks that do not fade. He did not. The chaos he orchestrated was specifically calibrated to be the kind that resolves. The disruptions were embarrassing and inconvenient and genuinely funny in retrospect, but they were not the kind that require someone to pay for them indefinitely. Every person the questline sends you back to has already arrived at a place where resolution is possible. Not because they are saintly or unusually forgiving, but because the situation Sanguine created was designed to reach that outcome. He is a prince who understands the difference between chaos that cleanses and chaos that corrodes, and he chose the former with precision. Sanguine's realm is called the Myriad Realms of Revelry. The name describes the structure accurately, not one realm but many, shifting and reconfiguring according to the desires and the nature of whoever inhabits them at a given moment. Most Daedric realms have a fixed character. Cold Harbour is cold and grey, and dominated by structures that express Molagbal's specific aesthetic of subjugation. Quagmire shifts, but shifts randomly, without reference to what anyone inside it wants. The myriad realms are different. They are responsive. They become what the people inside them need them to become, or what they have always wanted without knowing they wanted it, or what they would ask for if they knew the full range of what was available to ask. The realm is not generous in the way a gift is generous. It is generous in the way a mirror is generous. It shows you something that was already there, and the pleasure of seeing it is real, even if the source of the image is simply your own reflection. The philosophy that underlies Sanguine's domain is not simple hedonism in the way the word is usually used. Hedonism, as most people understand it, is the pursuit of pleasure as a terminal goal. Pleasure for its own sake, without reference to anything beyond the feeling itself. Sanguine's actual position is more specific, and, in its own way, more interesting. He believes that the things mortals genuinely want, the things underneath the things they tell themselves and other people they want, are more honest than the frameworks those mortals build to manage and suppress and redirect those genuine wants. A person who wants to drink and laugh and dance and be loud in a tavern and then go home full of warmth and noise is being more truthful about their nature in Sanguine's framework than the same person spending the same evening in careful, respectable, morally defensible activities that leave them feeling hollow. The indulgence is not the point. The honesty is the point. The indulgence is just what honesty looks like when you stop arguing with yourself. This is why Sanguine walks among mortals rather than commanding from his realm. The other princes who engage with the mortal world do so through agents, through artifacts, through the application of power from a distance. They reach into the mortal world rather than entering it. Sanguine enters it. He sits in taverns, he buys drinks, he makes bets with strangers. He participates in the texture of mortal social life with what appears to be genuine enjoyment rather than calculated manipulation. Whether he actually enjoys it, whether a Daedric prince can enjoy something in the way a mortal does, is a question his theology would probably find slightly beside the point. He is present. He is engaged. The quality of his attention when he is in a room with mortals is the quality of someone who finds what is happening genuinely worth watching. Whether that is enjoyment or a perfect simulation of enjoyment does not change how it functions. Samgaven as a disguise is interesting in what it does and does not reveal about who Sanguine is willing to be perceived as. He chose a form that is approachable without being magnetic. A charismatic, beautiful, obviously powerful stranger sitting in a corner would attract a different kind of attention. More cautious, more performance-oriented, less natural. Sam is the kind of person you sit across from without immediately trying to impress or protect yourself from. He looks like someone it is comfortable to be honest around, because he does not appear to be judging anything. That quality, the appearance of non-judgment, is exactly what his theology requires him to project, because non-judgment is the condition under which people allow themselves to be honest about what they actually want. Sam is not a disguise that hides who Sanguine is. It is a form that allows Sanguine to do the thing he is most interested in doing, which is being in rooms with people who are, temporarily, being themselves. The rose, Sanguine's rose, the artifact the questline ends with, is a summoning staff that calls a Dremora to fight for the user. As Daedric artifacts go, it is relatively straightforward in function. What distinguishes it is the name. Other Daedric artifacts tend toward names that describe their function or their power. Dawnbreaker breaks dawn. The Wobberjack produces chaos. The ebony mail is made of ebony. Sanguine's rose is named for something that does not describe what it does. A rose is beautiful and brief, and carries small sharp points that catch you if you are not paying attention to the texture of the thing you are holding. Whether Sanguine named it with any of that in mind, or whether the name is simply his aesthetic preference, is not explained. The artifact performs its function. The name stays with it. The combination is characteristic of a prince who thinks presentation matters, even when the substance is conventional. The Daedric worshippers associated with Sanguine are not organized in the way the followers of Boethiah or Molag Bal are organized. There is no formal cult, no hierarchy, no ceremony beyond the ceremony of the act itself. The gathering, the feast, the night, spent in whatever form of revelry the participants find most honest. Sanguine does not require his followers to identify themselves as his followers. He does not demand acknowledgement. The people who live in ways consistent with his philosophy may never invoke his name, or visit a shrine, or perform any act of formal devotion. They are, in his framework, already doing what he values. The recognition is optional. The living is the thing. What the questline says about Skyrim's ordinary residents runs underneath the comedy the whole way through. These are people, the wedding couple, the priestess, the innkeepers and farmers and minor officials who crossed paths with the Dragonborn's lost evening, who absorb disruption and move on, not because they are passive or indifferent to what happened, because their lives require continuity. A wedding couple who cannot move past an unexpected disruption to their ceremony is a wedding couple whose marriage starts in bitterness. A priestess who cannot restore a damaged temple without holding a grudge against the person who damaged it is a priestess whose congregation sees her priorities misaligned. The people of Skyrim live in a province where dragons exist, where ancient evils wake periodically, where the political situation means armed conflict is a real possibility in the street outside their door. The capacity to absorb chaos and return to normal is not weakness. It is a survival skill refined over generations. Sanguine understands this about mortals. He may understand it better than any other Daedric prince, because he spends more time among them than any other prince. The resilience that allows Skyrim's ordinary people to forgive a chaotic night and get on with their lives is the same quality that makes genuine indulgence possible. The knowledge that the morning after exists and is manageable. People who cannot recover do not allow themselves to fully experience. Sanguine's theology depends on the existence of a world that bounces back. He maintains it partly by ensuring that the chaos he introduces is exactly the kind that the world is capable of absorbing. He is not careless. He is precise in the way that only someone who understands a system can be precise about pushing it to its limit without breaking it. The staff goes into the inventory. The quest line closes. Sam is gone from the tavern table, or perhaps still there, at some other table in some other hold, watching another room fill with people who came in for a drink, and might, if they are interesting enough, find themselves offered a contest. The evening that was lost is reconstructed in pieces, but never fully recovered. The full sequence of what happened between the drinking contest and the waking up remains partially obscured, which is probably intentional. Sanguine's evenings are not meant to be fully documented. They are meant to be felt as a gap in the record, a morning with too much light and too many apologies to deliver. A faint warmth underneath the inconvenience that persists longer than it should. Something happened. It was not small. Nobody was seriously hurt. The world absorbed it and kept going. And somewhere in a tavern across Tamriel, a cheerful stranger with an unremarkable face is buying a drink and asking if they want to find out how far they can go. Before the Dragonborn of Skyrim's fourth era ever absorbed a dragon soul, before the word spread that someone had survived Helgen and walked away carrying something ancient inside them, there was another, the first. A man who discovered what he was in an age so far back that the civilization he served has crumbled into the kind of ruin that does not even leave good ruins. Just the faint impression in the ground where something once stood. He served the dragons when dragons ruled. He learned from them. He became the most powerful mortal in the world as it existed at that time. And then he decided that was not enough, and everything that followed from that decision took thousands of years to finish playing out. Miraak was a dragon priest, not an ordinary one. He held a position of genuine power within the cult hierarchy, a figure trusted by the dragons above him, and feared by the mortals around him. The dragon priests served as intermediaries between the dragons and the people those dragons ruled. They administered, they enforced, they maintained the systems that kept mortal populations organized and obedient and useful. Miraak did this work in the Merethic era, in the time before the Dragon War ended the age of dragon dominance and changed the shape of the world. He was present during the height of that dominance. He understood from the inside how it functioned and what it required. And at some point, at a moment the records do not capture precisely, because the records from that era are fragmentary, and because the people who witnessed what happened did not survive to write it down clearly, he turned. The nature of Miraak's betrayal is described in pieces across the Dragonborn DLC. He refused to serve. That is the cleanest version of it. The dragons expected obedience from the people below them, the way gravity expects things to fall. Not because they had negotiated the arrangement, but because that was simply the order of existence as they understood it. Miraak's refusal was not a negotiation, and not a rebellion in the political sense. It was a statement about what he believed he was. He had absorbed dragon souls. He possessed the voice. The power he carried was not borrowed from the dragons he served. It was his own, developed through his nature as a Dragonborn. He decided at some point that a person who possesses their own power sufficient to challenge the most powerful beings in the world is not obligated to serve those beings simply because the world has been arranged to assume that service. Hermaeus Mora found him at that moment, or created the conditions for that moment to occur. The distinction is difficult to establish and may not matter. What matters is that when Miraak was ready to step outside the system he had been born into, Mora was available with an offer. Come to Apocrypha. Bring your power and your knowledge and your unresolved ambition. In return, receive protection, survival, and access to depths of knowledge that the mortal world could not provide. Miraak accepted. He retreated into Apocrypha before the dragons could kill him for what he had done. And then he waited. The waiting is the center of everything. The questline asks you to understand about Miraak, not the betrayal, which is dramatic and legible as a narrative event. Not the final confrontation, which is the questline's climax. The waiting. Thousands of years inside a realm outside. In a library where every book contains something that was never meant to be read, and the atmosphere is permanently damp, and the sky, if it is a sky, shifts in colours that do not correspond to any sky visible from the mortal world. He was not imprisoned there. He could move through Apocrypha freely. He accumulated knowledge. He grew more powerful. He maintained himself in the specific way that a person maintains themselves when the thing they are preparing for has not yet arrived, and they do not know when it will arrive. By staying ready, by staying focused, by not allowing the weight of time to convert purpose into mere habit. What Miraak actually wanted has no clean answer in the questline, and that absence is deliberate. He says he wants freedom. He says he wants to return to the mortal world and claim what he considers his rightful position. He says the word freedom with enough frequency and enough apparent conviction that it is easy to accept it as the complete statement of his motivation. But the questline, if you follow it carefully, keeps placing small qualifications around that word. Freedom to do what, specifically? Return to a world where the dragons who wanted him dead are now mostly dead themselves. Claim dominance over a civilization that has no memory of him and no framework for understanding what he is. Become the most powerful figure in a world he has not inhabited for so long that everything he knew about it has been replaced by something unrecognizable. The time inside Apocrypha did something to Miraak that the questline acknowledges without fully explaining. He is not the same person who entered Mora's realm in the Merethic era. The accumulation of knowledge at that depth and over that duration changes the shape of a mind in ways that make ordinary mortal concerns feel distant. He speaks with the cadence of someone who has rehearsed the same positions for so long that they have become more formula than feeling. His anger is real. His contempt is real. But the specific object of his desire, the freedom, the return, the rightful position, has the quality of something he committed to so long ago that he continues pursuing it more from the force of that original commitment than from a clear present-day understanding of what achieving it would actually mean. His influence on Solstheim in the Fourth Era is the first sign of what he intends. The Allmaker stones fall under his control one by one. The residents of the island are compelled into mindless labor. Miraak is reaching out from Apocrypha, extending his power across the boundary between his realm and the mortal world, testing the range of what he can do without fully returning. He cannot leave Apocrypha on his own. Mora's protection came with a cost that is the shape of a cage. Miraak is safe inside the realm and cannot exit it without Mora's release. What he can do is extend influence through the Black Books and through the connection he maintains with Solstime's specific magical geography. The island is where he was, once. Something in it still responds to him. The Black Books are the mechanism of his connection, and also the mechanism of his undoing. They are Hermaeus Mora's artifacts, volumes that serve as doorways between the mortal world and Apocrypha, allowing knowledge to flow in both directions. Miraak used them to project his influence outward. The Dragonborn uses them to travel inward, into Apocrypha, into the sections of that realm where Miraak has established himself. The confrontation that results is not between two people with incompatible goals. It is between two versions of the same thing, two Dragonborn, separated by an age so vast that the world the first one knew is not the world the second one inhabits, each of them carrying the same fundamental nature, and each of them having done entirely different things with it. Miraak dies before he can leave. That is the fact the questline delivers at its conclusion, and it is the fact that carries the most weight when the questline is read as a lore story rather than a combat story. He has been waiting thousands of years. He has maintained himself through that wait. He has grown more powerful than almost any mortal who has ever lived. He reaches the moment where the Dragonborn has defeated him, and Mora, who has no further use for him now that a newer and more cooperative Dragonborn is available, finishes what the fight began. Miraak dies in Apocrypha. He never returns to the mortal world. He never uses the freedom he waited for. The waiting and the preparation and the thousands of years of sustained intention end in the exact location where they began, inside someone else's realm, on someone else's terms. There is a version of this story where the tragedy is straightforward. A man waited too long, and the world moved on without him. His knowledge became obsolete, not in its content, but in its context. He prepared for a world that no longer existed and arrived at the moment of return, only to find that the return itself had been managed out from under him by the prince he had trusted to make it possible. That version is true as far as it goes. What makes the story more than that version is what Miraak's existence represents in the larger architecture of what Skyrim is about. Skyrim is a game about the weight of what came before. Every quest line in it leads back to something older than itself. The Civil War is a current expression of political fault lines that run back through centuries of Nordic and imperial history. The College of Winterhold sits on a site with magical significance older than the college. The Forsworn carry a claim to land that predates every authority currently disputing it. The Draugr in their tombs are waiting for something that has not been true for thousands of years. The whole province is saturated with the residue of previous ages, pressing upward through the present one. Miraak is that dynamic made into a person. He is not a villain who happened to be ancient. He is antiquity itself, walking into the present and discovering that the present does not have room for everything the past tried to bring forward. The quest lines of Skyrim end. Every single one of them ends. The mine dispute resolves. The temple is cleansed. The murderer is stopped. The drinking contest finds its morning after. The bard finds the lost verse and the festival burns. The vampire under the swamp is cleared out. The king in the mine walks free or goes back to waiting. Each resolution is complete within its own frame. The person who carried the quest through to its conclusion moves on to the next thing, and the world that held the quest line absorbs the resolution and continues. Markarth does not stop being complicated because the Forsworn conspiracy was resolved. Dawnstar does not stop being cold because the nightmares ended. Solitude does not stop having political pressures because the Bard's College held its festival. The questlines end. The world does not end. It simply keeps being the world. Old, layered, full of things that have not been found yet, and things that have been found and forgotten, and things waiting in the dark of underground places for the right sound at the right frequency. Miraak wanted to be part of that continuing world. He wanted to return to it and be in it and have a position within it that matched what he understood himself to be. He was denied that not by his enemies, in the end, but by the prince he trusted to keep the door open. The door was always on Mora's side of the threshold. It always opened at Mora's discretion. Miraak understood this and made the arrangement anyway, because in the Merethic era, with the dragons moving to kill him, the arrangement was the only option available. He carried that understanding through thousands of years, and it was still true at the end. He was powerful. He was extraordinary in the specific sense of being genuinely outside the ordinary range of what mortals can become. And he died in a library that belonged to someone else, in a realm outside of time, without ever feeling the mortal world's air on his face one more time. The world outside keeps turning. The eras that preceded the present one are still present in the stone and the soil and the ruins and the tombs and the old words carved into walls that nobody reads anymore. The Merethic era left the dragon priests and the word walls and the mounds that still hum on certain nights. The first era left the reach folk and the buried traditions and the mine in Markarth and the old claim underneath everything. Every era leaves something. The present era is leaving something too, though the people in it cannot see clearly what it is, because you can only identify what an age leaves behind from the distance of the age that comes after. You have been here for all of it tonight, lying still, listening to a world that has more flaws than its surface suggests. The quest lines you followed through these 15 chapters are the small doors into those lower floors, each one opening into a space with its own depth and its own light and its own version of the question that every part of Skyrim eventually asks, which is, what does it mean to carry something old inside a world that keeps moving forward? The answer is different for each person who carries it. Miraak carried it as ambition that outlasted its own context. The Skaal carried it as faith that outlasted every pressure to abandon it. The Reach folk carry it as a claim that outlasted every attempt to erase it. The bards carry it as song. The dead carry it in their tombs, still waiting for the shaman's words that no longer exist. Sanguine carries it lightly, which is perhaps the version that travels best across long distances and long years. Tamriel keeps turning. The seasons move across it, one after another, and the stone absorbs each one and holds it the way stone holds everything, permanently, silently, without complaint. Somewhere in the deep dark of Blackreach, the fungi are still glowing. Somewhere on the coast of Solstheim, the Allmaker stones stand in the cold wind, free now, attended by whatever attention the surviving Skaal can give them. Somewhere in a tavern, a cheerful stranger with an unremarkable face is watching the room fill up and deciding whether tonight is going to be interesting. Rest now. The world will still be here when you open your eyes. It has been here a long time. It knows how to wait.